Lorenzo Beagley. How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Really good.
So, Joseph, you and I met, I think it was in the first year of the podcast. I was at the Torah conference there, the Restoration Torah conference that Josh Erickson and his family puts out, and just loved meeting you and your wife Ida there. So and we've been in contact since then, but we kind of have a little bit of history, not a lot, but a little bit. So it's good to see you again, man.
Good to see you too. Grateful to be here. Glad to be on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Lorenzo, you and I just very recently met up in Canada, right? Up Canada, northern
Sure.
Idaho.
Yep. Yep. We
So
spent about 5 hours getting to know each other and talking
yeah,
about the gospel. And
yeah, I didn't
yep.
realize you were Joseph's brother till you told me. And I was like, okay, I kind of tracked. I could see that. Yeah, it got a little bit of resemblance there going on. So, and I really picked that up as we were having that late dinner there, and I was watching someone eat poutine, and I'm like, okay, I've never seen this. I want to see what this looks like. I've never done it myself. Um, but a Canadian delicacy nonetheless. Haven't tried it yet, but at some point I'm gonna have to. So it was really good to meet you, and as we had these conversations, just kind of hanging out, I thought, yeah, these two guys would be good to get on. So I'm both grateful you're here.
Happy to be here. Just hope to edify everyone. So
Yeah, absolutely. So now you guys are brothers. Did you guys grow up in the group you're currently in?
no.
No, we our families had some history with a bunch of the people in the work. Like it goes back on our Beagley side back to a couple generations ago, and our great grandpa Beagley, his name's Jess Beagley. He's actually buried in Centennial Park, and he has a bunch of family down there. And then our Olszewski side is very well acquainted with and connected with the Mussers, and we kind of fell away or were separated quite a bit from every all I guess the work in general from about 1990 until about 10 years ago. So
Okay. All right. A little bit of time there. How old were you guys when that separation happened?
So I was
so
born in '94.
yep.
Okay.
So
Yeah, my mom and dad were married in 1990, so that's basically kind of when our grandparents stopped associating with everyone because of some of the interactions with Frank Naylor, the apostle, and Brother Timpson had had his stroke, and so our grandparents, especially Helmut Olszewski, he was the main influence around all of our families, and so he just didn't feel like that things were moving in a good direction, and so he separated himself. And our grandpa Larry Bigley is kind of went with him. So
Gotcha. Gotcha. But now that Beagley side, if I'm not mistaken, that goes back quite a ways in the church, right? And in like back to Pioneer era, is that right?
yes, so our let's see, it would be great grandpa John Beagley. He came over with the handcart companies in I have it here. It was the I have to go back a little. So he came over on the from New York to Nebraska. He was a passenger with John Lyman Smith, uh, and then he was the captain of that group of people. And then on the handcart companies, I don't think it was a handcart company. I would have to look again, but uh, there were two companies, and it was in 1864. Uh, the one company was Captain Hyde, and the other was Captain Snow, which was the company John Bigley, was most likely a part of. So that was one of the ones that went through the winter where they had over 100 people that passed away.
Really? What part of and forgive me here, I don't know this part of the history real well. Is that part of like the Willie Martin company? Is that were they in that
No,
group?
No, it was one of the other ones because there was the Willie Handcart Company, but there was also Captain Hyde, which I can't remember what Captain Hyde's name was, but those two, Captain Hyde and Captain Snow, were a couple of the other really bad ones that were in connection. So they set out uh, right at the onset of the winter of 1864. They arrived in November 2nd. So yeah, leadership was Warren S. Snow. That was the company that he was a part of. They said that there were over 100 people died from
Mhm.
that company, and there were 400 that set out from England.
That was
So it
so
was a lot.
about a third of them didn't make it on
Yeah,
that one.
yeah.
Wow. I don't wanna make light of any loss of life, but it is interesting. I kind of went through, and this comes from the government stats, right? It comes from, like, I don't think it's the Department of Interior, maybe it's the Park Service, the national parks, but I was doing a little research once, and on the Mormon Trail, you had a far better chance of making it to Salt Lake than you did to Oregon, or any of the other trails, Santa Fe Trail or whatever. I mean, it wasn't perfect, right? People still lost their lives, but by and large, they did fare better. But so that Beagley side, it comes to Utah, and at what point are they part of that early separation of what I like to term as proto fundamentalists? Like the really early, or is it a little later on when they separate from the church?
It's a little later on. So his great grandson Jess would be our great grandfather. He was converted by they had some of those meetings that the patriarchs had started.
Mhm.
After so it was a little bit after John W. Taylor. And so it was that generation right after John W. Taylor had passed. And so he was converted by a couple of those patriarchs and just went down to check it out and see what was going on. Went to some of the meetings with them down in can't remember. I had that information, but I couldn't find it. It was all
Oh, you're good.
compiled, but no, they he was converted pretty quickly over what the patriarchs were teaching. The Beagleys were a little separated, so they were out in Tooele. They started
Okay.
out they started out in Nephi, what became Nephi, and this John Beagley was when the wards and stakes were set up. He was the president of that group of people down in Nephi, what was to become Nephi, and then they migrated north after his son came back from back east. It was quite a story that happened with them. Had they were separated because of his first wife leaving because of polygamy, and his son John came over later when he was already married, had a family, and wanted to reconnect with his dad. And after they reconnected, then they moved to Tooele, and they were uh, like bishops and stake presidents out there, pretty heavily involved with Tooele when it was first organized. And then Jess Bigley moved down to the creek after he was converted. This would have
Gotcha.
probably been I want to say 1960s, 1950s, 1960s.
Okay. When he moves to Short Creek.
Yes.
Okay. All right, gotcha. Nope, that makes
Hopefully
sense.
nobody's offended with my dates because I don't have those exact.
No, no, you're just fine. You're just fine. So, Lorenzo, let's go to you for a second. Talk to me a little bit about the Olszewski line.
So we go back as far as Omaha, which was clear back in Germany, and I always get it mixed up, but I'm pretty sure it was East Germany was where they were living before it actually was separated. But so her husband, what they called Opa, he was in World War I, and the Omaha, the missionaries that were over in Germany were felt inspired to knock because they were having no success, and they were inspired to talk, knock on a door. One of the elders, I forget the missionaries' names, but they went and felt inspired to go back and knock on a particular door. And they opened up the door, and that was Omaha. And she is great, great on, I believe that'd be one side, great great grandma. And she, after a couple of meetings with missionaries, got converted, got baptized. Some of the children got baptized, but Opapaw had a lot of trauma from World War One. He loved his family, but he had a lot of issues mentally. Had a little bit of a drinking problem to try to drown out some of the trauma from that. But Omaha was very involved with the church. But then as you started getting closer to Hitler coming to power, then a lot of the people in Germany were getting nervous again, and so they were talking about migrating to Salt Lake, and that was when her older sons, Otto and I believe it was Alfred. Is that right, Joseph?
Yes.
And they came over to New York and worked for a year, 2 or 3, somewhere in that. I think it was 3 years to try to raise money for the rest of the family to come over. Eventually, they all made it to New York, and Joseph actually looked up some of this history, so he has some dates pretty good on some of that. But when they got over here, we were looking it up. It was around 18, or see, it would be 1930, I believe is
Yeah, I
what
was
it
gonna
was.
say would have to be the 30s, right?
Yeah, 1932, 1930 to 32. We always heard the story that when my grandpa Hilma, which was one of the younger siblings, migrated from Germany, he was 6 or 8, which would have been right around that 30, 32 year. So then they got to the States, and they had been there for, I want to say it was a year, and then they had started reading some of the Truth magazine that was getting printed. Um, and they had asked some of the brethren to come over and visit them when they were over in New York.
Okay.
And that was when Brother Joseph, I believe it was Brother Barlow, Brother Kelch, and Brother Zitting all came over. And I don't know how well everyone would know those brethren. I might need to use first names. They would
So
be
so Joseph
Charles,
so Joseph Musser came over to New
Joseph
York.
Musser. Yep,
John Y. Barlow,
yep,
Lewis Kelch.
yep.
I hope I get all these names right. If I
Charles.
offend anybody's ancestors, that's my fault. It's my bad. Um, um,
Same.
and then who else did you say came over?
Charles Zitting.
Charles Zitting. Okay,
Charles Zitting.
dude, those are some heavy hitters, right? Like, oh, and I think that that's kind of cool because I think it speaks to the kind of caliber of men that they were, right?
Yeah.
Look, in those days, it's not like, hey, just book a flight and let's go to New York and talk to these folks, right? I mean, most likely they're going by train, I would imagine, right? Air travel
Train and
wasn't
foot.
around, train or foot, maybe a car, right? Oh, that shows a lot of care for people, right? That we're going to drop what we do here. All those guys are busy, right? I mean, the council, they're all councilmen, right? And so to just drop everything to go talk to someone, I think it shows a lot about who those guys were.
It's funny. I was talking to my wife about some of the history, and she's a great granddaughter. I think it's just one great of Charles Zitting, and she said to me, "You can tell everybody that my great grandpa converted your grandpa, so you're welcome."
That's awesome. That's awesome. You know, I can see that from the Zitting side, right? Because I know Tom Zitting pretty well, and I think Charles is his grandfather. And I mean, there's a lot of love with Tom Zitting, and I imagine that's probably an inherited trait. It sounds like. So no, that's awesome, and good for your family, right? I mean, to like just jump on the boat, right? And okay, so I wanted to ask this question. I want to make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying that your grandma saw kind of the rise of the Third Reich coming, and she's like, "Yeah, this looks like trouble. We better get out of here," sort of a thing. Am I understanding that correctly?
As far as I understand the story, that's the way it happened.
Interesting. Interesting. And so one, good on her for being able to look down the road and just kind of read the tea leaves and be like, "Yeah, this looks like trouble." And then to it's one thing to recognize it. It's another thing to take that step of jumping on a boat and being like, "We're gonna go someplace where no one knows us," right? Were they fluent in English when they came over?
No, I think they had learned some English from the missionaries and serving in the church, but they were not very good in it. And the other thing that was really remarkable is having the strength and faith to even send her sons, and for the sons to have the faith to go over, because they were in their early 20s when they came
Yeah.
over to raise money. So that's not like you can just jump on the telephone and call back home. So that took a lot of
No.
courage for them to come and raise the money and be able to bring the rest of the family over.
Well, and look, I'm guessing they're coming pretty poor too, right? Because that period of time is about the time the Weimar Republic is winding down. So hyperinflation has kicked in. Like there's not a lot of money to be had. And so that's certainly keeping in that pioneer spirit, right? Like of we just believe this. Things aren't looking great here. We're gonna pick up and go. So she gets over with the family. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just thought it was so cool what you said. And so Joseph Musser, Lewis Kelch, Charles Zitting, and John Y. Barlow all go out east to New York to talk to your grandmother and her family, right? What happens from there?
So I can't remember if it was just one visit or if they came out a couple of times, but eventually it came to the point where they were converted to the fundamentalist work, saw the value of what principles were and the things that the mother church had given up. And so then they made plans to come out to Utah. And I'm not clear on when Opapaw would have died or how he died. I didn't look that up. But he had died, I think, when they were in New York. And so actually, when they come back out to Utah finally, then Omaha married brother Joseph Musser.
Okay.
So that's actually how we are tied to Joseph Musser, and you can start to see how some of the Olszewski sons, like Uncle Eric and my grandpa Helmut and Uncle Otto, were a part of a lot of that work.
Wow. Wow. So they move out, and where do they move to in Utah when they come out? Are they up around Salt Lake, or do they head down south?
They were in close connection with where Joseph Musser was living, and I actually am not sure where that was. I don't know if Joseph by
It
chance looked it
was
up.
it was in Salt Lake. It was right next to the same. It was like close to the Lincoln Street house. So it was Sugar
Yeah.
House area.
Okay, which was a pretty popular haunt for those folks during that time, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. I think that was one of the safe stakes for those who were wanting to practice the principle in those days. So so does the Olszewski when do the Olszewskis eventually start heading south?
So they never really ended up going south. They actually stayed centralized in Salt Lake area and then
Okay,
they moved to Harriman, which is where the majority of Bigleys and Olszewskis that are still fundamentalists live currently. So
gotcha,
Well,
gotcha.
there were some Bigleys that moved down in Colorado City too, as far as or Centennial, as far as I understand.
So real quick then, that kind of gets us through the pioneer era, unless there's something I've glossed over, and if so, just interrupt me. If there's something to that history that you feel like we should know, or that's cool, let me know. But that kind of takes us through the pioneer period, right? So
yep,
now
pretty
we
good.
get into what's that?
No, that was pretty much it. The one thing
Okay.
that I thought was interesting was a comment Joseph Musser made to uh, Omaha, which her name is Anna Carolina, and her husband was Otto, as well as they had a son named Otto. But anyway, so he says to Anna Carolina, he looks at her and he goes, "Thank God for a pure Ephraimite," which was an interesting
Um,
comment because in East Prussia, which was annexed by Germany after World War One, but that area was primarily settled by Jews, and so
mhm.
the Olszewskis are actually born and raised there, and so I think there could have even been some Jewish blood and mixed in with them as well. So it's just an interesting comment to me that Joseph Musser made. Just a little tidbit.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. And look, that would have been at the time where Joseph Musser was really starting to come into his own, right?
Yep.
There's a large portion of his life that I think he is um kind of getting his legs under him a little bit, right?
Yep.
He's not the senior man on the council or anything else, but you can see his progression, and he's awesome by every metric you want to measure. He's a man amongst men. So, all right, so that takes us through the pioneer period there. So we know what happens down south. The council is established. There's another council that's eventually set up north. If folks are interested in that history, I'd recommend going and listen to the Joseph Musser episodes that I've done, or the John W. Taylor. You'll get a good feel for that. So the split happens between the Beagleys and the Olszewskis and the folks down south, right? Centennial Park, is that correct?
Yeah, it was definitely kind of so the first split between when Warren took control and when they separated from Centennial Park. It was, I think, that more of the family stuck with Centennial Park and with Alma Timpson and that side of the
Mhm.
split a little bit closer than anyone else because of what happened with Joseph Musser and his strokes. And when that
Right.
all happened with Rule and All
Yep.
Red, they just didn't agree with all of it.
Sure.
And so they just felt like that wasn't done correctly and all that stuff. But it's interesting because Alfred E. and Eric and Helmut, which were all brothers, they were all part of the Junior School of the Prophets with that Joseph
Okay.
Munson started up. So they were very, very intimately connected with Joseph Musser and with his family. And so they it was pretty hard for them to see Joseph Musser do that with the
Right.
Allreds, go to the Allred split there, and so they were kind of lost a little bit to know what to do. And uh my grandpa definitely had respect for Elmer Timpson and what he was trying to do, what Brother Hammond and all of those brethren on that side of the split were trying to do. So they definitely were more connected with that side of it than even John Timpson when that split happened.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I find myself in an interesting position that I don't have a huge dog in that fight, right? I I feel like one, I've got no family on either side of me that's got a vested interest in that. I'm the first Mormon on either side of my family. In fact, so so not Mormon that, like, when I become a polygamist, I tell my younger brother, "Hey, I just need you to know this is what's going to happen." And he goes, "Well, you're a Mormon, isn't that what Mormons do?" Right? He's got no conception
No idea.
that, like, the mainstream doesn't
That's
practice
great.
that. And I'm like, "Well, no, not all of us." And I explain it, and he's like, "Wow, this whole time I just assumed you really stunk at your religion, and that's why you hadn't done it yet." And I was like, "Wow, thanks for the vote of confidence." Right? But, um, yeah, no, so, yeah, and so I don't really feel passionate one way or another about that, but I respect people who do, right? I get it, right? It was a contentious time. And so I usually try to stay out of those fights because, again, I just don't have a dog in them.
Yeah. Yeah, we're enough removed, Lorenzo and I as well, to where it doesn't really matter to us as much either.
Right.
And so and even our parents weren't really involved that much. They were involved some, like our mom went to the Jeff school when it was up in, that I can't remember where it was, like close to Little Cottonwood Canyon. So like up in the Cottonwood
Okay.
area. So my mom went to school there for a couple of years. Interesting enough, she was there with a couple of the Nielsen kids too. So that was interesting. We just found that out later, but so they did that. And our grandpa Larry Bigley, he and his family still went to the meetings with at the Waymans and did have some involvement with all of them for quite a while until they were a little bit older. So my dad's was born in '68, and so when he was getting close to getting maritable age, they had a few people they wanted him to consider that was a part of the whole group of people up here in Salt Lake. So it's interesting. They had some connection, and then after my mom and my dad did get married, they definitely from that point on, 1990, they basically stopped having much to do with anybody.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So then, with that in mind, what do they do when they split? Right when the Olszewskis and the Beagley split, what does that look like? What does your normal, I don't know, Sunday service look like? What does school look like? All that stuff. What's it like growing up in what sounds like kind of like a family ministry, if you will? What what does that look like on the day to day?
Well, took a long time to get things organized. Like our grandpa Helmut did not feel like that it was our responsibility to set up like general meetings as like we go to church every Sunday, that we're going to call it church or that we're going to do anything like that. It was more that he felt like we needed to still talk gospel, needed to teach the people gospel. And so we started doing what you would consider church once a month ish. And then it kind of got a little bit more consistent for me. What I remember when I was pretty young. I was probably 3 or 4, so it would have been 1994, 95 when they started doing it a little bit more consistent. And we had general meetings pretty consistent for quite a few years. It kind of fizzled out a little bit more when I got to be about 18, 19. And so they stopped doing it as consistent. Things deteriorated quite a bit as things moved along. There's a lot of problems and stuff like that. But no, my grandpa was pretty adamant that he wanted things to continue. Like he wanted to have what he was taught in the Junior School of the Prophets continue on. And he wanted to make sure that we were trying to stick to that as much as possible. But as things are, he gets old. My grandpa Larry gets old. They start to have a little bit of they take a step back, let the
Mm.
younger generation start taking over a little bit. But we had co-op school for a little while when let's see, I was probably 12. Uh, we started a co-op school, and that was awesome until things there were too many problems with all family being involved like that. When you have basically aunts and uncles and moms and dads, they're the only ones doing all of it, and they're the only ones involved. And if that's the only thing that you have, you start to have a lot of problems. You start to have kids going home and complaining to their mom and their dad, and it's problems that most schools have. But in that setting, it was so tight knit that you had a lot of persecution and peer pressure that was starting to set in within 3 or 4 years of that school going. So it didn't last very long. But
If I could, I wanted to interject one thing too.
go ahead.
Yeah,
Um,
please do.
the one thing is too is when Joseph was talking about not having a church setting and stuff, people, I mean, I think it'd be good for people to understand that Grandpa Helma was set apart as a high priest, but
Mhm.
he didn't have any particular position in the church. And he also was considered in our family society as the spiritual leader. Um, that is another reason why you could start to see our Olszewski aunts and uncles, more specifically the sons of Helmut, start to take leadership roles, as it were, because everyone looked to Helmut for that spiritual leadership. I think Larry tried, Grandpa Larry tried, but a lot of people, Grandpa Helmut had a lot of different personal revelations in his life and was really respected. And so that kind of helps or kind of sets the tone, so to speak, on why you have some of the school and some of the work related stuff. The other issue that happened with the tight knit thing is we Helmut and his sons had their own business, and Larry and his sons had their own business. Helmut and his sons had their own business, and the sons, as they were growing older, tried to unite more. Well, not just in spiritual things, but temporal things too. And so, um, I don't know how necessary it is to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Larry's family, for whatever reason, generally did better financially, which I think caused some pride and stuff to grow in the sons. So you can kind of start to see some of this dynamic building between the Bigleys and Olszewskis. You've got this spiritual side from Helmut that everyone respects. You got more some of the money stuff that's coming from Larry that maybe people are envious of. And so there's some things that happen behind the scenes, so to speak. And so you can see that. And so anyway, back to what I was going to say is because they wanted to be more united, they merged companies. So now you have the spiritual side and the temporal side both united, working together, trying to create essentially a united order.
Mhm.
And then because you don't have really a church, you've got men that are being set apart in the priesthood, um, high priests, and so forth, but no one's really the person conducting or taking charge except for Helma, and then whoever he would ask, which would generally be his older sons. And so because of that, started to grow traditions and leaning towards how the structure of the family circle will work.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. So I want to go back to Joseph for just a second. You said something that caught my attention. You said there were persecutions starting up around the school specifically. What kind of persecutions? Is this coming from the outside in, or is this infighting amongst the families there?
It was basically always infighting or more
Okay.
of basically peer pressure, and also uh, you have a lot of because Lorenzo did a really good job of setting that tone of who was more of like highly thought of spiritually versus temporally. And so our mom is the on the Olszewski side, and her brothers were very domineering, I guess you could say, when it came to feeling like that their father had very much set the tone spiritually. And so there was a lot of expectation to do things the way that they felt like was right because of that. And so you have a lot of people feeling like things should be done a certain way without real leadership and without somebody actually having and receiving revelation. I feel like you don't have enough spiritual stability in a group of people like that and in that setting. It I don't know if we got too far ahead, like talking about the actual structure of
Oh,
what took place, but um, but yeah, no, the school was really cool. I feel like it actually set a lot of people on a good path. It could have kept going. It could have kept on a little bit further along the line of giving people a little bit more freedom to actually live their lives. But when everyone, all of us started getting older, like I was a part of what you would consider the oldest class when the co-op started. And so we only did a few years of school, and I think it could have continued on past high school years just because the only reason it did is because I think everyone got older and you start seeing people be more independent. And I think they wanted to keep the idea of what they were trying to push as an agenda more solid and more solidified and keep it more in the younger years. And so we would graduate school and go work for the family business. So it kept everything so tight knit. There was not the opportunity for people to branch out and to experience anything more outside of what was going on in the community.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And so did you guys have like a community in the sense of like geographical boundary sort of a thing, right? Did you have something that would be equivalent to, I don't know, the creek or out here in Missouri or something like that where, people are congregating in close proximity?
Yeah, we had about, what would you say, Lorenzo? It was probably 40 some odd acres that our grandpa Larry had bought originally.
Too, is
And
what I understand.
yeah, we fenced it off pretty heavily and made it to where it was a compound. I mean, it was definitely, it was kept separate from everywhere else, and we were, for all intent and purposes, we were about as FLDS like Warren's group as you could find in the rural Salt Lake area. As far as what I could tell, I mean, you're looking back on it, we were definitely basically when the council decided to have a certain dress code and a certain way of doing things in the 50s and then the 60s, with the hippie era happening, and
Right.
everyone went to long sleeves and made sure that their hair was combed and no beards and all that kind of stuff. And so you have a strong, I guess, what you would call probably a Musser influence. Like Guy Musser's influence was pretty heavy with our grandpa. Like he respected him tremendously, and so he started to incorporate a lot of those things into his family. And you would see a dynamic with his sons and his family saying that our grandpa Larry and his family was a little bit worldly, so to speak, because they didn't do
Mhm.
things the way that they felt like they should do it and stuff like that. So there's that dynamic that's happening with the whole group. That's why I would say peer pressure was such a big issue.
I see what you meant. Yeah, it
But
makes total sense.
The other thing is too, I think, is in the shift when it comes. Well, the other thing I think it's good for people to understand is when you say isolated, it wasn't necessarily like we're weird people trying to go off and live in no man's land. It was we're trying to get out of the city and find enough. So when Larry was doing really well financially, he's like, where can I find property that I can afford? Essentially, it was a very natural process. And he's like, oh, out in high country estates, which is Harriman now, but it was the closest city was Murray.
Right.
That was clear back when Costco was on 7200 South. For those that would understand where that is and so forth. And so he's like, oh, I can buy this 40, 42, 43 acres for dirt cheap. And I can move my family out there. I'm making really good money. And Helmut lived in the city, like Main Street, second, no, 21st South, and like second West. Yeah, somewhere in there. It was really up more in the city area. I could have gotten that wrong. It might be up like six north or six south, somewhere in there. But it was city life. And then a lot of the old Shevskis would come out and visit Helm or Larry out in his acreage. And so you could start to get camaraderie and stuff. And so it wasn't this voodoo weird. It was a very natural process. Everyone wanted country life.
Right. Right. It wasn't anything that was ordered. It was
No.
just what was desired, so to speak,
Yes.
if that's
Yes.
a better way of putting it.
Yep. The
Okay.
biggest issue you had in where we grew up is you started to, well, the first problem is there's no church, so there's no accountability. You just have families. There's no real um, organization, and the closest organization you have is the respect you have for the Olszewski. Um, sons from so Helmut, and then what he did for people. But he was a very servient person. I don't want to paint the wrong picture of Helmut either. He loved the people. I mean, every single Sunday he would watch the LDS meetings or churches and stuff. He would always watch conferences. So he was very invested in the mother church. He was invested in what he was used to doing. And he loved a lot of Larry's children, the SIP. Just as the generation started to grow up to my generation, he was very invested in them. Helped actually get a lot of spiritual revelation for different people, and so there was a lot of love and respect because he didn't push an agenda. He wasn't like, I'm the one man, follow me. It was like, wow, you are amazing because you're serving me. Now I want to serve you. And I think that got skewed and abused, not maybe intentionally, as the Olszewski or Helmut's son started to take power, so to speak.
I see. So they kind of, as they came up, they just kind of maybe ruled with a heavier hand, if that's a good way of putting it. And if I'm mischaracterizing any of this, please let me know.
I think they used the love that the people had for Helmut, and again, probably not intentionally. I don't want to put any actions or words in anyone's mouth, but they used that kind of against the people.
Okay.
Like, do this because this is what Dad stood for. Do this because this is what Dad taught us. And or not necessarily do this, but we should do this, or this should be done because Dad taught us this. If that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So when 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 Helmet passes away and his sons take over, is that when like is that when the school starts to shut down, like all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it was definitely a lot more. I would say things started to shift quite a bit more. There was a little bit more of their influence that was starting to seep into everything that was happening. Like there was definitely a dynamic power struggle between all of the brothers as well. And so you have a fine balance that they tried to keep with each other and trying not to become I try to be super careful because I don't want to mischaracterize anybody, but
Or
there was just people are human and they do things that all humans have done throughout all ages of time, and you can't help but when you're in a situation like that, you just exercise too much unrighteous dominion, even
gotcha.
unsubconsciously. And they just started to do that a lot more. And Lorenzo pegged it perfectly with that thing that he was saying about we ought to do this thing because it was what dad taught, or that dad was a good person because he did these things and he was a very righteous man, so to speak. And so he was loved of God because he had these revelations, he had spiritual experiences he would share. And so they would use that not too dissimilar to what Warren did with his father.
Mhm.
Like you see that pattern pretty prevalent with that. That's why I say humans are the same. They just do
Yep.
the same things over and over again.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So back when Helmet was alive, was there ever a push for like missionary work to get out and recruit, like that sort of thing? And
No,
then my next question would be like, what about temple ordinances? Were those being performed at all? Any of that sort of stuff?
no, and the biggest reason why was because our grandpas, neither one of them had received their ordinances. Like he was
Uh,
Helmet was not a part of the council long enough to when they started to actually give ordinances, like especially with what Alma Timpson started to do. They did not. I think the last Beagley relative that we had that received their ordinances in the church was Jess Beagley. So that would have been
okay.
Larry Bigley's father, and I don't know if any of the Olszewski line received their ordinances. I don't think they were a part of the LDS Church long enough to receive their ordinances. So they didn't have as much of a love for the temple as other people had. They definitely believed in it. Like we always, I was always remember being taught the same thing that most fundamentalists are taught is that this will be done in the millennium, and that we don't need to necessarily worry about it. We just need to be good people and do the best that we can. And the one mighty and strong will come back, set the church in order, and we will then be able to go into the temples. All the same fundamentalist stuff that most people grew up being taught.
Yeah. Do you guys pray towards the temple? I've heard that in a few families.
I think a couple of families did. I remember that being something that I heard a couple of families did do. We never did. I mean, our family never did.
Right.
But we,
I
Yeah.
also,
go ahead,
Oh, go
Lorenzo.
sorry,
ahead.
I was just gonna say the other thing is too in connection with ordinances and the temple and stuff is there was a push to try to prepare for it because we would wear the um, a similar clothing as the garments growing up. I remember
Mm,
that pretty strong.
No,
Um,
that'd be the
a,
thing. The
a
fundamentals
lot of
don't have to do thing.
long, yes. Kind of like
gotcha.
if anyone's ever watched Little House on the Prairie, and you have your Charles Ingalls and the different ones that had the long underwear. It's kind of a similar idea in the sense, and the idea that was always taught is we're preparing for the temple, or we're preparing for our ordinances,
Gotcha.
and so there
Gotcha.
was some of that in there too.
Well, that's good, right? I mean, at least they didn't lose the feeling like it was not important. At least they never garnered the feeling it wasn't important, right? They understood that, hey, these are important. So that's definitely a good thing. And then what about like missionary work? And any of that done? Like anybody from the outside coming in, going, hey, you guys seem like you're set up pretty cool. And it sounds good at the beginning here, right? With helmet and the way things are running, then you got the combination. But was there ever any converts you guys ever saw come in, or was it kept strictly with the family?
It was pretty tight knit. They definitely did not really want any other influence. I remember one family that did come out a couple of times that was fresh out of the creek. They came. They were I think it was our grandpa Larry's third wife's sister. I know that's confusing, but she came up with her family when they left the creek, and so they visited quite a bit. But ultimately, they all did not want to be a part of what was happening out there, and not none of us understood why at that point. We were all still pretty young. I mean, I think I remember seeing different people only a handful of times in all of my life growing up, and we never went to anything else. We never really. I don't remember ever hearing anything about any other group other than just very like whitewashed history the of the groups, like what happened with the splits and stuff like that. It was
Right.
pretty. There wasn't much information never taught to us about any of that stuff.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So then would you guys remain did did this group that the Olszewskis and the Beagley set up, were they friendly with other groups? Like, because at some point you need somebody for your kids to marry, right?
You think so? You think
Well,
so?
that's what was weird is we just didn't even. I mean, when I finally started to come out of the community, I didn't even realize there were other fundamentalist communities. Like I didn't even know there was a Nelson Naylor group. I knew very little history about Centennial and all that stuff. It was pretty much like we're all there is. And the other problem too is there starts to be a lot of traditions in the sense that we're maintaining a higher standard of living, and no one else out there is doing that. So we cannot associate with anyone outside of our 43 acres because we're the only ones maintaining this higher way of living. And so that automatically set the precedence for, well, okay, there's no one else out there. So that's when you start to get the idea that you're fine to marry your cousin because that's just normal.
I see. So that's kind of what had to happen
Yeah.
in that group. Okay. All right. So
But there was
what is
still
it? Oh, go ahead.
sorry. I was just gonna say, but there was still a lot of good principles taught in the sense that
Sure.
you need to pray, you need to find out who you're supposed to marry, you need to do it the right way. But the problem is you put God in a box, there's only so many answers he can give you.
Yeah. And this is where with some of the groups things start to get problematic, right? And in my opinion, as kind of somebody who came into this cold and looks from the outside in, is when you develop that us and them mentality, right? Now, certainly there's some of that is healthy, right? You don't want to necessarily invite somebody in who has nefarious purposes that wants to undermine your community and the morals and values that you espouse in that kind of religious setting. However, when you start to other people, right? Um it it can get awfully lonely awfully quick, right? Because then you're like, well then, how do you grow? How do you expand? And look, this was one of the reasons that it's funny, right? I go through phases in fundamentalism where I'm very independent to start with, but the thing that ends up getting me is like, one, my kids need someone to marry, but more than that, even it's this idea of, well, what's the end goal in Mormonism, right? What is the absolute end goal? The end goal is Zion, right? To have that city erected so that Christ has a people that he can come to. And so if if you can certainly have a Zion type family all on your own, I'm not saying that that's not possible, but if 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 you're aiming for the thing, right? If you're aiming for Zion, that means you gotta work with other people, right? And that usually means that you now have to become patient. You now have to, because let's face it, you can't yell at another man like you yell at your son, right? Like it's that ends up in a fist fight. And so you have to start developing patience. You have to start developing um, the ability to work with other people. And when you're so convinced that you're the only ones that have it, right? I don't care who the group is, you start to get a little insular. And when you get insular, two things typically happen. One is that you start facing problems with gaining and retaining converts, and you have problems with going out and being able to be friends with somebody from a different group or even the mother church. It just complicates things. So at what point then do you two, decide, okay, this is not working for us and we have to move on?
Before we go there, if I could, I wanted to also add one thing.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
the other thing I think it's important for people to remember is as you grow up in this isolated community, you don't know there's something else out there. You don't know there's something better out there. You're very happy. Like for all of us growing up, we were very, I mean, I had an amazing growing up life. I don't want anybody to think it wasn't, that there's not, as we talk about what to avoid, there's not like there was nothing good in it. There was a lot of joy and happiness. We had a lot of good times. And as children, you don't know there's anything different. You don't know there's anything better. You've never been introduced to it. So when you're isolated, you don't have that. Because you were talking earlier about the fact of who do you marry and all these things. And you don't look at it like that when you're so isolated.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So did you two come out of that family group at roughly the same time?
Yes.
It was pretty close, yeah.
Who came out first?
Joseph was the bull that broke the fence and ran out.
Yeah, I was the test dummy.
I like that. So Joseph, and then I'm going to go to you with the same question, Lorenzo. So hang on just a second. At what point do you think to yourself, like, well, first let's start here. What makes you start thinking about like should I be looking at other options at this point? And then two, how did you discover there were other options, right? Because per what Lorenzo said, it sounded like, again, it's kind of insular, right? So
Yeah.
you're not floating around knowing about the Nielsen Nailers or any of the other groups out there. When did you become aware of them, and then what caused you to start looking outwards, right? Like you need a new spiritual home, so to speak.
Yeah, I look back on it and I'm blown away at what God did in my life. And it was interesting because I don't feel like that our family was structured the way it was by chance, because we only have myself, Lorenzo, and William, our younger brother, and that's all the kids my mom and dad had. And so that set the tone for us to kind of be a little bit even isolated in our community because we didn't have any sisters. There wasn't that dynamic where we were popular because we had sisters. So we were a little bit shunned by that naturally anyway. And so we weren't super popular, and that helped quite a bit. Even I don't know if you say that helped or made it more miserable. It kind of did both, but but
Right.
but anyway, we when I was probably I think I was 18 after I had graduated and I had done a little bit of work. I was pretty disgruntled because I was used a lot because the Bigleys are really hard workers. Like our dad instilled that into us. Not that the Olszewskis weren't either, but it was more we have a pretty intense work ethic. And so we were used quite a lot in different like in the work aspect of things. And so I felt like there was a little bit of taking advantage of some of that stuff, and so that started my mind being like, "Why is this happening?" And so I started thinking a little bit more to myself. I obviously never said anything because if I did, then it would have been a disaster. I would have been branded, a rebel, and I would have been, why is he saying that stuff?" And so I kept a lot of those thoughts to myself. But the big, the biggest catalyst was I believe I was 19, 20, let's see, 21 probably. We were working on the Provo City Center Temple. We were hired, the family business was hired to do finished carpentry on that remodel when it was turned into a temple. And so I just remember going through all the rooms in the temple, and it struck me so powerfully, the elements in the temple. And I thought to myself, why do we not talk about this stuff? And so I started to really
Mhm.
do a lot of investigation. I started to I listened to the Doctrine and Covenants all the way through several times while I was working on it. And so I asked one of my uncles one time, I said to him, why do we believe that we are the only ones who hold the priesthood? And we feel like that we're the only ones. Why do we not share that with other people? Like the Doctrine and Covenants teach, we should share the light that God's given us. And he basically told me that why well, first off, he told me that I should be asking my dad these questions. And I said, I have. I just want to know how you feel about it. And he said, well, that stuff's not for us to worry about. You should just worry about doing what you need to do and don't worry about that other stuff. That was a massive red flag to me. I was like, that's a super easy question to answer. Why can't you answer that question? And so I was not impressed with that at all. And so I just did a lot of investigation after we got done with working with that on that temple. And I started to listen to other books about other fundamentalist people and some of the stuff that happened down in the creek with Warren and all that stuff. I started to really do a little bit more investigation about some of that kind of stuff, and it just opened my mind to a whole bunch of other stuff. And by the time I was 24, 23, 24, I was like, we've got to do something different. Like, this is just not working. And I think my mom and dad knew that, and they took some steps to we stopped working with the family business. We started doing our own thing a little bit more, and eventually all got hired onto our own individual jobs. And from there, it was
Yep.
we had to start gaining a little bit more independence. and that helped tremendously.
Could I interject one thing?
Yep.
Um, really quick, I don't want to take away from Joe's story, but I wanted to add to help paint this picture is also as the Olszewski and Bigley families were working together, creating a united order. That same concept was also within each family organization. And so I remember from my perspective, as Joel was telling his story, one of another catalyst that we had is we were trying to work this united order in our own little family, and it was not working. And I remember Joseph talking a lot about it, like, why are we doing this? That isn't working. We should be more responsible for ourselves and taking care of ourselves. And so that also led down Joseph's path that he's talking about.
Gotcha. No, that's good. That's good context there. So Joseph, as you are, as you're kind of aware now that there's these other groups out there, um, some of them not in great shape, obviously. I'm sure you read about the FLDS.
Yep.
It sounds like your parents are giving you a little more rope, because I think they're starting. It sounds like they're starting to understand that you got some angst going on, right? And
Yep.
that some of that angst is well founded. This is not normal young man angst. That what you're seeing is 100% on track. Before I ask my question, I do want to say this. You are correct that anytime you ask a question, that I want to say this, there's nothing wrong with saying with someone saying I don't know. In my opinion, that's a lot better than trying to baffle somebody with BS, right? Because people are going to smell that all over the place.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so there's nothing wrong with saying I don't know. But when someone says, well, that's just the way it is, and try to shut you down, that's, look, there's some answers in the gospel that have to be applied there. But that should be with the gospel, not necessarily with practice, right? You wanna understand why it is you do the stuff you do. Um,
Yep.
whether that's going back into somebody's journal going, "Oh, yeah, look, they tried what we were talking about and it failed. So, yeah, let's not do that." Um, but when someone just shuts it down with, "Yeah, you don't need to worry about that." Well, you should probably kinda worry about that, to be honest with you.
Yep. It's like you should look into that a little bit more now. Just because you
Right.
said.
Yes, absolutely. So So as your parents are giving you more leash, they see that, hey, you got some valid critiques here. How long does that go before you realize, okay, this just isn't working at all, and I have to make a change? And then how did you decide to make a change? And then how did you decide to go where you did?
So they did do really well. I mean, in fairness to where they were at, where we were at, they did do pretty well. I mean, I appreciate what they did do in giving me a little bit more leeway with that. I mean, they didn't know very much of what I was doing, other than some comments I made here and there, but which obviously that was on purpose. Um, but no, I think the biggest thing that happened to me was I wanted to get married, and I was like, there was nobody that was going to be interested in us because of our family situation. And so I did have to really start thinking about how was this going to happen? What was my future looking like? I was 23, 24. I was like, I'm getting to be an old man. I'm not going to get married. I'm not going to find anything. I'm like, what's going to happen? And so that was obviously that's going to be a big motivation. But I think, I remember my cousin, had gotten hired on by chance by one of the nailers, and he started working for him. Went to conference out there in Missouri. Uh, he basically got pulled along to go to that conference because he didn't have anything to do with them either, and they were pretty isolated, even separate from us. Like we knew them, we talked to them, but they weren't living out there on that 40 acres anymore. But so he went to conference out there and he calls me on the phone. He's like, "Hey, this was fabulous experience. Like I really appreciated everything that they had said. We had some really good conversation on our drive out there." And I was like, "Wow, that's amazing." And I asked him a little bit more about what kind of the talks were about, and what the things they've taught, and he didn't remember it very well because he was so in the Twilight Zone with the whole experience because he had never experienced anything like that. But I was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna go to one of their meetings. I'm just gonna go to Fireside. So I got some times and when they were doing it, and I told my mom and dad I'm like, look, nothing is gonna happen. We're not going anywhere. Nothing is gonna take place with us. We're separated. Nobody's gonna want to marry us. Nobody's gonna have anything to do with us. And I want more for my life. And so they're like, okay, you can do that. That's fine. They're like thinking to themselves, I know they were, that they're like, there's no way he's gonna do anything like that. That's crazy to go be a part of, as what they would call it, Ivan's group. And so yeah, I
One
went to
thing too,
Fireside.
if I could add to your story that helps with the context, is a lot of our thought process wasn't upon a natural premises of meeting people and getting to know people and getting married. It was the Lord can move mountains through faith. He's done it before. He'll bring some woman from some far distant land. She'll just magically come to our community and be a wife for you. And that was a lot of some of the ideas that happened with that too.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, that's not happening. I was like, that's not how God works most of the time.
Right. Well, it was good that your parents recognized that, right? Even though they probably didn't expect you to go down that road
Yeah,
to the extent you did, they were at least willing to let you get out there and look, right?
yeah,
That had to
yeah.
account for something.
Oh, it did for
So
sure.
so you go to a couple of these firesides and then like do you feel the spirit abundantly? Like what happens there that kind of moves you along in the process?
So the first talk that I really remember making such a huge impact on me was a talk that Henry Naylor gave. And it was so powerful. I felt the spirit so strong, and it moved my entire spirit. Like I just was like, he's basically teaching the exact same thing I remember all of my life growing up hearing. Like it was the same. I was like, this is the same gospel. Like these guys teach the same thing. And that was such a big thing to me. And I talked to a bunch of the guys afterwards. I remember in true fashion, David Nilsson, he talked to me. Like he talked to me a lot. Myron Naylor talked to me a lot. And those guys were awesome. Like they just treated me great. And I remember uh they were very interested in what was going on with me, like they always are. That's just true to their character. Um and then I remember it took me a little bit after that because I went to meetings every so often, and then I joined their choir that they were doing at the time. And that I loved music, and I always wanted to sing, and I always wanted to do that. I'm no good at it, but I still wanted to do it. Um, so I did that for a little while, and then I convinced them to come to a conference in Salt Lake. I think it was a year later, and I just remember we went to that first session of conference, and it was great. I really enjoyed it. A bunch of the guys from up in the Blackmore community and all those guys that live up there came down, and Winston Blackmore talked, and I remember that was you know Winston Blackmore. His talks are what they are. But we went out after that and sat in the truck after the whole family did, and I just remember my dad giving this talk to us. He bore his testimony of the gospel and what he believed in, and he made the statement. He said that that's what I believe in, and I did not hear any of that in that meeting today. And he said that if any of us want to go to the second session, we can find a different place to live.
Whoa.
Wow, that set me back. I just remember sitting there. I was like, well, I can't go to the second session because I don't want to get kicked out of the house. Oh, the angst after that for the next 3 months was so bad. Like it just set me back so much. And I just remember I prayed so hard that I asked God, please help me to know what to do. Eventually, I just came to the point where I was like, this is where I feel like I need to be. Like, I remember through my prayers, I was like, this is the community I'm supposed to be a part of. This is where I'm supposed to be. And so I sat down in front of all of them and I just said, this is what I feel like God wants me to do. And they all, the whole family was like, well, we feel like you're kind of crazy, but you don't need that. My mom was like, well, you could do this, but if we see any of the worldly elements start creeping into the family, then you are going to have to find a different place to live. And I was like, fair enough, that's fine. But yeah, after that, I started going to church regularly and kind of never looked back after that.
Kind of relate to you a little bit. Different circumstance, but when I wanted to take the discussions to join the LDS church, my mom was like, if you do that, you can't take him here, and if you join, you got to live somewhere else. So I had to finish my senior year living in in a converted shed out in the back of my mother-in-law's property, so I could finish high school. But I know that feeling, right? That is gut check time,
The
150%.
hardest thing I ever had to do.
Right, right. Okay, we're gonna come back to you in a second. I want to go to Lorenzo now. So Lorenzo, how do you get there? How do you get to where your brother is?
So I really took a lot of the things Joseph was doing and thought about what I wanted in my own life. But one thing with me is I kind of live in my own world, so I don't really get affected too much by other people. Um, I just kind of did my thing, and I wasn't really like, it's fine. I wasn't really super driven to like I said, I wasn't like Joseph where I was this bull that broke down the fence and ran through. I just was like, yeah, I'll go with you. I'll tag along. That sounds good. But I hit a point in my life where I struggled intellectually. I was one of my uncles was really hit up for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time and messing up in his language and things of that nature. And I didn't like that, and I would really get harassed. Well, harassed is probably strong language, but I would get really hit up for doing that. Like, you're being just like Uncle so and so, and you just did it again. And so I had a point in my life where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I got to change. And so I started, and this was actually probably mm, 2 years maybe before Joseph started going to the meetings. And I was like, hey, I gotta fix my life. So then I started doing a lot more book reading. I started learning about the Constitution. I started praying a lot more about where am I going? And I got an impression that one day you would serve in some form of government.
Mm,
And so I was like, okay, I gotta study and I gotta figure out what the Constitution is. I gotta study what government is because all that stuff we didn't really. I mean, you have your basic school stuff, but it wasn't this deep dive intellectual study. So I got a lot of history books. I got Martin Luther. I started doing a lot of that reading. Started being very careful in how I would talk to be more intelligent. And so by the time Joseph started doing a lot of these moves to the meetings and stuff, our younger brother William went with him a couple times right at the very beginning, and then he was like, "Yeah, this isn't for me." And so then I kind of took gunshot, so to speak, after that happened. William, my younger brother, left, and then I jumped on with Joseph, and I went to a couple firesides. I remember my first priesthood meeting. I called my dad, and I was like, "This is weird. Is this normal?" Because they would have their discussions and they, read scripture and then they raise their hand and they talk about it. And I'm like, is this even right? And so my dad was actually amazing because he was like, yes, that's the way we used to do it at Jeff's school when we were all together still. That's very normal.
mm.
And so it started to catch on in my heart of like, this is something. And so then after I think about a month went by of going to meeting, I was like, and I didn't do it very faithfully. I would go, and then 3 weeks would go by, and I'd go again, and it was a very kind of slow process for me. But I eventually hit a point in probably 2015, 2016 that I was like, I can't support my family circle anymore. When I say my family circle, I mean the Olszewski and Beagley family circle, not necessarily my dad's family. And
Why
that
is that?
it was a lot of doublespeak. It was a lot of, here's the doctrine, do as I say and not as I do, kind of a thing. Like, don't rest the scriptures, and then the next sentence it's resting the scriptures. And so there was a lot of stuff like that happened that I was like, it was just wrong, really. And I got really emotional about it, and I was like, this is wrong. And I talked to my parents about it, and I
Was
still have
Joseph gone by then?
no. He
Oh yeah.
from
I
my
at that point in 2016, I had been going to church for 2 years. I
yes,
was well,
but he was still at
uh,
home. Like, he
we
never
were
got
all
kicked
living.
out of the home.
Yeah, we were all
Okay.
living at home. But I had been done going to any meetings and stuff, having much to do with anybody out there at that point, like for a while.
And at that point in 2015, 2016, our family meetings were maybe twice a year. It was if someone had a baby or there was baptisms, then we would get together and have a meeting. And so my parents were, or I should say our parents, were very much like, we still want to labor with our family. We don't want to cut them off. So we would get pulled to go to the meetings. Um, I eventually got to the point that I was like, this is just not going to work anymore. And I wanted to more participate in what I saw Joseph doing. He was growing, and I had kind of hit a point in my personal studies where I was like, I need other people in my life. I can't just go down this road by myself. I hit that point, and I was like, okay, I I went from tag along to I want to go.
Gotcha.
And after that happened, then I was a bigger voice, or a voice period, when Joseph would talk to our parents, and he'd be like, this and this and this, and point out the wrongs and the rights and so forth. And I was more vocal because it's what really came from my heart, and not just a tag along thing.
Gotcha.
And so then I started to more faithfully go to priesthood meetings and churches and stuff. So then finally, I went to one of my first big events with Joseph. Actually, our whole family went. It was a masquerade ball they had in 2016 in the winter, and then we had gone to, Joseph and I went to the um, New Year's party they had following month, and we actually had a big hiccup with my parents because we had chosen to go to the Nelson Naylor, or as Joseph said, as we call the Ivans group, their New Year's party instead of the Beagley New Year's party, because we started to break off, and that caused a lot of problems in our own family. And so there was because of those problems, then there was like a 2 month, 3 month gap, and that kind of mulled over, and then it was kind of back in the seat, so to speak. So then by 2017 was kind of touch and go, but then by the time 2018 happened, then in July, Joseph and I had officially become members of the church.
Gotcha. And then how were things at home after you guys did that? After it was like official. Hey, this is what
By
we're
the
doing.
time we got to that point, it was pretty good. Like, my
Yeah,
parents had
it's
finally
been
got to
pretty.
the point where they were like, okay, we agree, we are not going to these meetings anymore.
And they were actually going down that road too. And that was really encouraging to see that they felt like they were good fruits with what they were seeing with Lorenzo and I. And so it was definitely having an impact on the family in a positive way.
Awesome. And that I've told people this before, right? Because I get a lot of questions for folks from the LDS Church who are thinking about making this change. And Mormonism is unique in the sense that our familiar bonds are so tight, right? And so sometimes when someone will come out of the church and become a fundamentalist or just step away from the church, period, there's this feeling of like, hey, you're ruining heaven for the rest of us, right? And that those and I've tried to tell people when they react like that, that is not coming from a bad place. That is just them worried for you, worried for their eternal family. That is absolutely a sign of love. Nonetheless, you got to do what you got to do, and somehow you got to make peace with that. And it's awesome. It sounds like you guys did it in such a way that the fruit that was being born by you attending there was enough that your parents could look at that and say, okay, this is obviously a good thing. This isn't just a neutral thing. Or this isn't a negative thing. This is a positive thing. So did your parents ever end up coming out with you guys fully?
Yeah,
Yes.
they definitely, I mean, as a where we're at now, I mean, our dad is the president of the missionary program,
Nice.
and our mom served for a while as our version of the Relief Society presidency. So they're definitely all invested in it now. It's it's uh it's been amazing. I used to say there's no way that mom will ever want to be a part of it, 'cause she's got those pretty stubborn German roots, and so it takes quite a bit of the spirit sometimes to move her. But when she does move, she moves all the way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. So Tanya's s- family, my wife Tanya, um, we've been married for about 3 years. None of her family are LDS, right? None of them are
Mhm.
Mormons. So she converted to the LDS church, and then I messed that all up. And and then um and then from but me and my wife Amber, we've been married for 30 years. Be 31 this October. And her family goes back in the church a little ways. And when when Amber finally lets her mom know, "Hey, this is what we're doing, and we're going to be fundamentalists. We're going to live this way." Um, Boy, her mom was mad at me. Right. Real mad at me. Like not a little bit, like a whole bunch. And um finally when we got out here to Missouri, the temple was getting close to being finished. And Amber comes to me one day and she goes, "Hey, I got a weird prompting." Now, I've learned that when Amber or Tanya says, "Hey, I got a weird prompting," I should listen, because sometimes it results in, "We should move to Missouri." And so, I thought now's a good time to parse this out, right? And look, I love Missouri. I'm glad I'm here. But nonetheless, I'm like, I need to find out what's going on here. And she goes, "I think I should invite my mom out to tour the temple before it's dedicated." And
Oh
I'm
wow.
like, "Mm,
Are
like,
you
are you
sure?
sure? Like, is am I supposed to go find someone to hang out with, like, for that week she's out here? Like, do you want me gone? Like, how is this gonna work?" And she's like, "No, I think it's gonna be okay." And I'm like, how's it going to be okay?" Right? Like, how is this going to work? And she goes, "I don't know, but I know this is a prompting." And I'm like, "Okay, that's enough. So let's buy her plane tickets. Let's get her out here." And she comes out and it's awkward, right? I mean, it's
I bet.
horribly awkward, right? Um, "Hey, here's your daughter's sister wife, right? Like that kind of awkward, right?
Yep.
And so, because I don't know if Tanya had ever met her in person before. I think she may have once, but it was really short. So this was the first time that they were kind of going to be like spending some serious time together, right? And anyway, so we come and you know, at the time we had just moved out, so we were living in Springfield. We weren't living where we are now by the community. We were about an hour south of the community. So I arranged for Doris and us to go through and get a tour of the temple there. As you know, it was just getting close to finishing up. I think that was August, and it would be dedicated in October. So she takes a tour of the temple, and we all come home, and of course it's late. And I'm like, tell you what, no one's cooking tonight. I'll just go grab burgers or pizza or something, right? And I go out and I come back into the house, and the house is deadly quiet. And I'm like,
Oh no.
uh-oh, right? Like, and while I was gone, sort of a thing, right? And I walk upstairs and I just hear Amber and Tanya and Amber's mom talking together. I'm like, well, there's no yelling, so that's a positive, right? Like, I'm wondering if I need to like get a stick and put the stick in the door, and if it comes out chewed out, just run, right? Like, there's a couple strings of thought I got going on here. So I just cracked the door open, and I'm looking, and they're all giving each other pedicures, and I'm like, yeah,
Wow.
no, that was my remark, right? Like, that was not on my bingo card. Everybody getting along, right? And in that moment, I had a decision to make, which was, do I say something or do I just go downstairs? Well, knowing who I am, I'm like, I think I'm just gonna go downstairs and send out a text, right? There's no need for me to muddy up the waters here. But and then we went out to Hannah's graduation just a few months back, and again, Doris was my mother-in-law. I have to edit that one out. Doris, my mother-in-law, did it again. Was very, very cordial to Tanya. Held our baby. I mean, the whole ball of wax.
Oh,
My
that's
point
awesome.
in telling that is to kind of reflect back on your story here with you guys, right? With your parents coming out. It's, you know, certainly Doris is by no means thinking about jumping ship and becoming a fundamentalist. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying though is that a level of understanding had been reached, right? Once she understood that I wasn't subjecting her daughter to, you know, a crazy compound out in the desert somewhere, right? Things got a lot more mellow, and Amber could show that she was happy living in this lifestyle and living this religion. Everything got equalized, right?
That's awesome.
And that's something I've told people is that it takes time, right?
Yep.
It's not, don't expect to sit down for Thanksgiving dinner and go, by the way, we're fundamentalists, pass the peas. That's not going to work well, right? Like,
Yep.
that's going
It
to,
does.
and look, that's how it's going to start. But understand, it's going to take probably a few years to smooth all that out. But it absolutely does get smoothed out because
Yep.
family bonds are tight. They're meant to be. And once everybody can see that everybody else is happy, nobody's getting abused, that sort of stuff starts to fade away. A few months back, Drew Briney released a set of scriptures called the Restored Version, or RV for short. Since that time, quite a few copies have been sent out to the delight of those who made those purchases. Well, despite the number of purchases, Drew and his team want to get a copy into the hands of as many people as possible. Because of this, there's a limited time offer for a discount. But before we get to that, I want to let you know again what all you're going to get in this set of scriptures. In the Book of Mormon, you're going to find dozens of footnotes that show Joseph Smith's final edits. In the Doctrine and Covenants, there are over 1,500 footnotes showing Joseph Smith's revisions, as well as some context that's giving to help you, the reader, understand exactly what's going on as the revelation was given. In the Restored Version, you will see that the lectures on faith have been put back into the scriptures. Now, the format of the text has been restored back to its original paragraph form. But despite this, Drew was able to keep the Orson Hyde versification, which allows for a smooth, easy read, as well as the ability to do deep dives. Now, in addition to all of this, there's 125 uncanonized revelations from early Mormon leaders, including Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, John Taylor, and more. Now comes the good part to save you, the listener, some money. From now until this printing's run is out, just for being a Mormon Renegade podcast listener, when you purchase your copy of the restored version, at checkout, simply put in the discount code RENEGADE in all caps, and you're going to get a 10% discount. Now, I don't have to tell you how important it is that if we want to get back to what the Lord had originally intended through the restoration, we have to get the scriptures back to what Joseph had said they were. This restored version of the scriptures does just that. Again, all you got to do is head over to restoredversion.com, select whatever color you would like, and at checkout, type in the promo code RENEGADE in all caps, and you get that 10% off. So whether you're buying for yourself or a loved one, this will be a purchase that stands the test of time, that allows you to deepen your faith, not only in our Lord Jesus Christ, but also in the restoration. Now, let's get back to the show.
Yep.
And it sounds like that's what happened with you. And good on your parents. I mean, not just for converting and not just for letting you guys do your own thing, so to speak, but the fact that they were willing to sit back and honestly watch. Good for them. Good on them. I mean, that took a lot. It's tough to break down those old family dynamics.
Absolutely.
I think too, a big thing is being governed by true principle, having because even what you're telling us about your mother-in-law's story, I think it's good for people to see, okay, we've been told this bad story about these people, but when you see them living wholesome, good lives based on principle, and not just principle, but the principles that you believe in as a Mormon is a huge thing. I think one thing I wanted to bring up earlier too is even in coming from an enclosed society with a lot of traditions and things, I think people need to remember it's important to have fear in God and not fear of people,
Mhm.
and to not be afraid to ask questions. And like we told in our story, if the question is not being answered, then we should try to go find it. And so I just think
Absolutely.
it's really important that we govern our lives on truth and not based on our own even perception of truth. And I think that's where a lot of help can come from in having association with more people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, well, I think that kind of brings us to today, right, so to speak. I want to ask just a question to each of you to kind of wrap up this segment, and then we're going to jump into John Taylor 10. But if you could go back in time and you could talk to your teenage selves, right, as you first start to get this inclination of, hey, maybe there's some more out here for me to go and experience. Maybe there's someplace else I'm supposed to be. What would you tell that kid now? Lorenzo, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Joseph.
I think because of, like I said earlier, of being so in my own world, I would probably say look, because I think you can get so unraveled in your own world, your own everything, that you forget to look. And I think being, and this takes experience, but I think being open to seeing something different is good. I think if you're
Mhm.
so closed off that you're just like, this is the way, or this is my life, or just being complacent. I think I was very complacent, and I think looking for something better, or and it doesn't even necessarily need to be just better, but I think because of our faith, looking for something greater in the faith. And that can look different for a lot of other people, but I think if you're not religious, I would say look for something bigger or something more than you.
Right. No, good advice. Joseph, same question to you.
So I'll probably take mine a little bit more along the lines of people who are stuck in that way of life, like what we were stuck in. People who have been taught things from a young age that this is the way it is and that's it. I think my advice would be more to myself in that instance would be no man holds the key to your salvation
Mm,
because so many people use salvation as a tool or a battering ram against everybody. I've seen it so much. I've seen it in any fundamentalist group that is closed off. I've seen it. I saw it out there. It's that thing that everyone says, if you don't live this way or you don't do that or don't do this, you're going to lose your salvation. Salvation is a gift that has already been bought and paid for by Christ. He gave us the opportunity to live again. It's up to us to work out our exaltation. That's to me, I think, the advice I would give myself back when I was young.
to not tie your salvation to any mortal, to tie it to where it belongs to Jesus Christ,
That's
and
right.
then follow his example and where he tells you to go.
Yep. Yep.
100%. 100%. I do have one other observation. And Joseph, this one's to you because you had the experience. Why do you suppose it was the temple that first flipped the switch for you?
I think it actually goes back to fundamental stuff. I think it's seeing how much bigger the gospel is than just the little closed view that I always had. I think to see baptism in its proper form, I guess what the restoration brought back to us in our minds, the symbolism, and to see the baptismal font, to see the sealing rooms, to see the celestial room, to see all of these rooms that mean so much and have such a bigger scope than the small-minded view that most fundamentalists get into. And it just set me down that path of saying there's so much more. The gospel's so much bigger than just the little view that we have of it. The temple just opens up everything. And it's a door to me that opens up eternity. And I I would say to anybody as well, look into it. And try to study out what the temple is and what it represents. Because wow, it's been one of the biggest impacts of my entire life. Like I have such a love for the temple.
Yeah. No, I do as well. There was once when I first joined the church back in 95 when I first became a Mormon, and I was taking some temple prep classes. I remember there was an older gentleman, he was the stake patriarch who was teaching that class. And at the end of the class, the last class, at the end of it, he said something that has always stuck with me. And he said, "The last thing you guys should probably understand is that the temple is the Ellis Island in which you will become citizens of Zion."
Wow, that's
Until
awesome.
y and he's 100% correct, right? Um, I think that that is a microcosm of how Zion will how we will live in Zion, right? A consecrated life that is devoted to bringing forth the kingdom of God. And that encompasses many things, including being a good husband and a good father, and having your family sealed up up is one of those things. And I am like you, Joseph. When I came out of the church, I had a big angst about not having access to the temple. Right? I thought there goes temple work, right? And I when I was in the church, I was a weekly temple attender. And I was also a temple worker. I enjoyed the temple a lot. Even when I found out about all the changes I thought, man, wouldn't that be cool to see? And so you're right. And I've said a lot of the things we do in the church, the day-to-day Sunday meetings ultimately are supposed to culminate in the temple. That's the road you get put on. Because I think that's where the rubber really meets the road for us as Latter-day Saints. Great stuff. The other thing I'll say, and this goes to something Lorenzo had said about looking around, right? Getting outside of yourself. And I've tried to tell people this, and I'm not sure I'm ever clear on how I'm putting it. But there's things that we know at our core, right? Things that are I always say it's a thing they could wake you up out of a 4-month coma and ask you a question and you still know the answer, right? Um, the Book of Mormon is true. Joseph Smith was a prophet. Temple ordinances are a thing. All that stuff. I know at my core. Everything else, it's an idea, right? And there's nothing wrong with ideas. I think that's one of the gifts of Mormonism and the restored gospel is that we have so much that we get to unpack that we'll never touch it in this lifetime. Um, we get as much as we can here, but there's too much for us to fully comprehend all the way through. The gospel is expansive. But along the way, we're going to get ideas. And that's good. We should get ideas. But when things are just ideas, never tie yourself too tightly to those things. Because if you get better information, if you get more revelation on a subject, you want to be able to drop the bad idea that quick so that you then can embrace a better idea until you know it for sure. And so I think that really ties in with what Lorenzo was saying about not not getting too tied to an idea. Look around, right? Take stock of your situation. The other thing I've been on lately is we need to look inside of ourselves too, right? Look, not everybody is supposed to join the temple group or the law group, however we're referring to ourselves these days out here in Missouri, right? Not everybody is supposed to join the Nielsen Nailers. We're all going to flourish in a little bit different spot. And I think that's for our benefit. I think that's for benefits of other people. I think as you guys came in the Nielsen Nailers, you had a positive effect on people that were already there. And you had a positive effect from people on you. And I think that's oftentimes where the Lord tells us to go, right? Is where we can both have a good impact and then have good impacted upon us. And so I don't think it's necessarily a one size fits all thing. I don't think there is a one group necessarily, just like I don't think there's a one man. Um, there's just different places that we can all flourish in. And that doesn't mean we have to tear down each other's groups either, right?
Yeah.
I tell that to guys who come out of the church because we all did it when we came out of the church. There's a period of time where you're just angry with the church. You feel like you got lied to. You can't stay there very long because it's a bad look. It starts to make you look like the guy who can't get over your ex. And you wanna it's not a great look. At some point, you just gotta be thankful for what you were taught and then move on from there and go get more. But anything else you guys wanna add to that part of things before we jump into John Taylor 10 here?
I have a couple things, if I could.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
one thing I wanted to add to what you said, Dave, about getting revelation and new things is I look at the church history, and I think it's important for people to remember that when you get revelation on something that is different than the what Joseph Smith restored, it should only add to and not take away. Because
Exactly.
a lot of the church says we get modern revelation, but it takes away. And
Mhm.
everything you see from the prophets, from the Savior, from Joseph Smith, it added upon. I know I was listening to Drew Briney, shout out to Drew Briney, that he was talking or giving some of the minutes from Orson Pratt's disfellowshipment, so-called a meeting with Brigham Young, and wow, I apologize, I just totally lost my train of thought. You might have to edit that out later. But anyway, the point is it should add upon and not take away. The other thing I wanted to add is, wow, I lost that too. Okay, well, we better move on. Obviously, the Lord doesn't want that revealed.
Nope, no problem. It's all good. I do it all the time. Don't feel bad. So half the time I can't remember what I say on these things. All right. Joseph, anything else you want to add before we move into John Taylor 10?
I was just thinking a little bit about some of the family that we have back where we grew up. And one thing that I would like to say, if anybody, any of them do listen, we don't say any of the things that we're saying to try to push anybody away. It's not really for that. It's to bring to light that God is so much bigger and the gospel is so much bigger than the small-minded view of men. And this life that we get to live is a blessing, and it should be lived to its fullest. It shouldn't be put in a box and to be said that, because some good men said that we don't want to do anything because we're waiting till something else happens. Ask God if that's right. It doesn't mean that those men were lesser men because maybe they had a faulty idea or that they had something to say that wasn't exactly right. That's okay. Men make mistakes and everyone is not infallible. And we have the opportunity to do what God wants us to do. And that is going to look different for everybody. It's not a cookie cutter gospel. Like, we are not designed to live the exact same life. All of us. We are meant to do great things if we are willing to listen to his spirit. And
Mm.
I think that's a big thing that most people don't realize, even in the LDS church. I mean, we don't have to follow the script. We don't have to say we're going to follow the family of proclamation to the world if God doesn't want us to. We have the opportunity to follow God and to do what he wants us to do. And that is going to look different for everybody. But I think that's the biggest thing that I'd like to add to that whole conversation that we've had so far. That's so important to me.
Beautiful. No, that's great. That's good stuff. And look, in a weird way, this this revelation we're about to get into kind of kind of touches on what we've talked about here already. I didn't realize it until we were halfway into there, but once again, I felt like the Lord pulled through for us, or for me, I should say. You guys are
Dave,
probably fine.
I
My guardian
do have
angels,
one
they're
more
like, we
thing I'd
need to
like
give
to
him
say.
a. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to add one more thing before we move into John Taylor 10.
Yeah.
Because of growing up in an isolated community, I feel like it's really important for anybody that is in that situation. It's really important to remember that the ordinances, we've talked a lot about the temple and the ordinances in the temple. And I feel like it's really important for people to remember that the ordinances are meant for this life. Because a
Mm.
lot of idea is, oh, we'll do it in the millennium. Oh, we'll do it in the next life. But everything we essentially belong to this earth, and everything has to be done in this life. And if we don't do it in our lifetime for us or for those that have come before us through the temple, then we will be petitioning God from the other side that our posterity will do that work for us. And I don't think enough people realize that importance. That it's now. It's not, oh, it's not that important. We'll worry about that later.
Yep.
Oh, you're 100% correct. I there have been so many times with both Amber and Tanya that we'll be in a disagreement, but then we'll remember our temple covenants, and we'll be like, "Is this worth it? Is this worth having an argument over?" Right? It's going to give you some perspective. I am a big believer in just what you said, Lorenzo. It's a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up. That the temple is not just for tomorrow or just for somebody on the other side of the veil. Certainly, that's a big thrust, right? I don't want to take away from that. But it makes us better now if we live up to those covenants. It's going to make us better fathers. It's going to make us better husbands. It's going to make us better priesthood holders. It's going to make us better disciples because of the covenants that we enter into. And it's also going to allow us to have a more fuller eternal perspective, right? I don't think we'll ever get the full eternal perspective here. But I think it gives us a glimpse. And once you have a glimpse, that allows you to put things into proper order and proper perspective. So, you know what? Maybe the little squabbles you're having, sometimes those absolutely need to be worked through. Other times you're like, is it worth it? Um, is it worth the argument here? Yeah, there's a lot of them I don't think that are. Um, and walking in those covenants, I think, helps us gain that perspective and then act accordingly. You were about to say something, Joseph. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. I was thinking along with exactly what you were saying about these. The thing is we don't realize the importance of these relationships. We don't realize the importance of our familial bonds. And the temple teaches that so beautifully of how connected we are and how connected we will be on the other side. I I feel so sad that you have so many people who, because of something that is a tradition, nothing from God, it's a tradition that is passed down by men, that you can cut somebody off and it'll be made right later. Why is that such a misunderstood idea? The fact that we do not take for the seriousness of these relationships and how important it is to continue to work on these relationships, to stay connected with our family and to not cut them off and to be able to, because you never know. I mean, what you said about your mother-in-law, and for me with with our parents, and anybody who's left where we grew up, those that have left and gone done whatever that they've done, you never know what somebody needs or when they're going to need it. And we should continue to talk to each other and be able to, even if you can't talk gospel, at least allow them into your life. I mean,
Yeah.
I just don't understand this point of view that people have that you could just cast somebody off. It bothers me to no end.
I'm with you. I'm with you. There have been, I'm going to tip my hand here a little bit. I get a lot of emails, right? And some of those emails will sometimes be dudes going, "Hey, I'm ready to be a fundamentalist." And I'm always like, "Well, are you? Are you really, champ? Let's find out about this, right?" And so you ask some questions, right? And look, there's one guy I'm thinking of who did it right. And I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him. But the first time he makes contact with me, he's like, "I'm ready to be a fundamentalist." And I'm like, "Tell me why." He's like, "I think I'm ready for plural marriage." And I'm like, "Are you?" Like, like, um, and then, he did start talking about some of the deeper doctrine, which gave me encouragement because a lot of times I can sort these things out by the dude who's just like, "Yeah, I'm ready for another wife." Okay, tell me about Adam God. What is that? How about temple changes? Yeah, they changed it, right? Like, and it's at that point I'm like, yeah, you're not ready, right? You need to read these things, so to speak. But then there's some guys that I ask this question: did you talk to your wife about any of this? Well, no, but I'm sure she'll come along. I'm like, okay, we are going to call the timeout right here, and you are going to go talk to your wife because I don't want to be in the business of busting up families. I much more would rather be in the business of helping people get their families sealed up for eternity.
Yep.
And that ties in with what you were going to say. What you were saying there, Joseph, is that's the business that I would prefer to be in, is sealing families up, not breaking them apart.
Yep.
And there is a right way to go about this. And so for any dude out there listening, thinking that you're ready and you haven't talked to your wife, you're not ready. Um, and you
You
need to
don't
go
know your
talk to
wife
your
as well as
wife.
you think you do.
Right, right. Yeah, go talk to your wife. So awesome, 100%. All right.
The other
Anything
thing
else?
I was
Yeah,
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
was gonna say too, I think anybody that has this idea that the ordinances are for when you're perfect has a wrong perspective of what the ordinances are for. And I know there's quite a few people you've had on, Dave, that have talked about the ordinances, but particularly because I'm more connected with Isaac Musser did a fantastic job describing the um, ordinance of the endowment and the laws and covenants. So, and some of the ideas that people have of that, he did a really good job breaking that down and helping people understand. Number one, it's meant to help us become perfect. We shouldn't be perfect and then go do it. It's like the prophet Joseph said, the garment was made for man, man was not made for the garment. And so it's important that we realize these things are meant for this life to help us get back to be like God, not, oh, I'm going to go be perfect and then I'll go get my ordinances. And I just wanted to stress that that's a part of number one, why it's important to have the ordinances in this life. And then two, if you don't know about them and you're thinking you'd be perfect, go learn what they're actually for.
100%. 100%. And that's a big hurdle sometimes to get over. Because there were some groups that did use it like, well, quite frankly, like getting married, right? Kiss the ring, tell me you're going to be a good soldier,
Yep.
and then we'll talk about your blessings, right? Um, it's not meant for that. And anybody who uses it that way, you should be very weary of. And I'll just lay that out there right where it stands and let people write me emails later. But that's honestly how I feel about it, right? Anybody who says, "Well, how loyal are you to this one man versus how loyal are you to Christ?" Yeah, that's a massive red flag that you're going to want to avoid.
Oh yeah.
And I think too, another thing people forget is let's go back to the fundamentals. Before we start shooting for I'm ready for plural marriage, let's start asking the question, am I living first principles of the gospel? Do I lie? Do I cheat? Do I do these things? Am I living the beginning steps, so to speak, before let's jump into the laws of the celestial kingdom?
Right. Right. 100%. 100%. Good stuff, guys. You're all over it. So, anything else before we move on to the other subject?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's just roll into this. So, real quick, Joseph, do you want to start reading and then we'll just take turns here?
Yep. Just tell me when I should stop.
Yeah,
Okay, so just to make sure I'm in the right place, page 613, John Taylor 10.
613. Yep.
Okay. All right. So this is repentance before a day of trouble. There are some things that ought to be put right. Some time ago, there was word given for the brethren and their families to put themselves in order before God, the Lord. And it is necessary that these things should be carried out, for there has been a negligence in some of these matters. And if my people and priesthood desire my blessings and guidance and protection, they must and shall be subject to my law. And it is necessary that the various quorums of the priesthood should place themselves right before me, saith the Lord.
Go ahead and stop right there. Okay, so I got a question I want to throw out to you guys. What do you think it means that our families be put in order before the Lord?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I want to get some
Well,
ideas.
I'll put this out there. I've been actually talking a lot to my wife about this very thing, and I think one thing that's good to remember is when the Lord talks a lot about setting the church is going to be set in order and all these things, is the family is what comes or builds or makes up the church. And so if our
Mhm.
families are not in order, the church won't be in order. And so being in order, to my mind, or one of the aspects of it is to be in line with what he will talk about further about being in line with following his laws and commandments that he's given us already, and to follow the law and the pattern that he laid out.
Excellent. Joseph, you got any thoughts?
I think what Lorenzo says about following the pattern is exactly right, because the gospel is beautiful in the sense that it has a very clear direction and guidelines on how to be like God and how to return to his presence. Again, the temple teaches this in extremely good plainness, and I think that, I mean, I could go on a lot about it, but fundamentalists forget that putting ourselves in order means living the fullness of the gospel. And in order to live the fullness of the gospel, we have to obey all the laws, rights, and ordinances pertaining to what we agree to live. I think that is, in my opinion, exactly what God's saying we need to do to put our families in order.
100%. And then, okay, so then with that, down there in verse 4, it says, and it is necessary that the various quorums of the priesthood should put themselves right before me. Thus saith the Lord. What would that be about, right? Because at this point, this one caught me a little, it caused me to question a little bit, because this is after the Mormon Reformation, right? This is after Brigham has gone through and organized stakes and wards and all these things. So I would expect that the priesthood would already be kind of in order that way, right? So what do you think he's saying here?
I don't think he's talking logistically in the sense of um, how many deacons, how many teachers, and proper order laid out at Doctrine and Covenants. I think he's talking about, because he says this in other revelations, the fact that it's not necessarily meant for the entirety. Well, how should I say this? It's not meant for every single individual. It's more generic, but also there are those that have been placed in the priesthood within a quorum that is neglecting their duty. And so, from my perspective, as what he's saying is, there are those within the priesthood quorums that are not right before him. And so I think it's a negligence of living up to the ordination you've been given.
I think you're onto something, because that's exactly where my mind went with both of these. So, because I was thinking about even with the families, right? And look, in John Taylor's time, feminism isn't exactly running amok, right? And I think for the most part, men are usually pretty good about providing for their families. So, what else could the Lord be talking about here, given the time frame we're in? I believe it is a true principle that every time we take a step up in priesthood, right? We go from the Aaronic to the Melchizedek, and then the various offices in the Melchizedek priesthood. That is a greater commission to serve. That is not self-aggrandizement time, right? As a young man with the Aaronic priesthood, your duties are fairly straightforward, right? If you're a deacon, you're going to go collect fast offerings. If you're a teacher, we know what that entails, a priest as well. Then as you take that next step to the Melchizedek priesthood, now you're serving your wife and your children. Now you're serving in your various war congregations. Um and look, I think it's a symptom everywhere. I don't think it's unique to fundamentalism. I don't think it's unique to the LDS Church. I think that these are human problems that we encounter, that some men, when they get that authority, it's just like it says in 121, they're going to start to exercise unrighteous dominion, those sorts of things, right? And I think he's pointing this out both to families as well as the quorums, right? To your point, Lorenzo, that maybe they're organized really well, but they're not necessarily doing what they're supposed to in serving their members and serving their quorum members. Likewise, with the family, I got to ask the question, right? Like, are we serving our wives as much as we should be, right? Are we seeking for their comfort and to gain their trust and their love in that way through service? And likewise, I wonder if that's what's not going on also with these quorums, right? They've maybe grown a little comfortable in some regards, and this is the Lord trying to say, wake up, you gotta go share. Lorenzo?
I think it's also interesting as I'm reading this again, he doesn't say to reorganize yourselves. He says, place yourselves right before me, which very much insinuates what we're talking about, that it's not that they're disorganized in a church function, but they're not right before him. And I think another thing is too to remember that we're reminded of often is as you elevate in the priesthood in offices, that doesn't mean okay, now you are no longer required to fulfill the requirements of the Aaronic priesthood. It's actually the opposite of that. You now have more. It's not substitute, it's more. It's Aaronic and priest and Melchizedek all in one badge for that individual.
Absolutely. Joseph, anything you want to add there?
Well, I was going to say, isn't it also in keeping with the pattern that God lays out as far as everything that is pertaining to us? Because priesthood, I mean, I like to say that the church is designed to bring a man to the place where he can uh, come into the way. And the Aaronic priesthood teaches us as the first offices in the Aaronic priesthood teach us to be responsible young people. It teaches us to cultivate good characteristics as young people and as new members of the church to and puts us in the way of being able to then accomplish the bigger elements of the priesthood. And I think that's exactly what's going on here. And I think that I mean it's rampant in the church in this era as well as all eras. To me, men not living up to and magnifying their callings in the priesthood. I mean, we we see it everywhere, and I think that's exactly what's going on here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, good. We got consensus, boys. We're, whether we're right or wrong, we got
Good for
consensus.
us, huh?
Yeah.
We all agree.
All right. I'll go ahead and pick up here and read this next paragraph, and then we'll kick it on over to Lorenzo there. And that as individuals, they should place themselves in that position. For if they do not, they have no claim upon my blessing or protection. A day of trouble and anxiety and sorrow and judgment will soon overtake this nation and other nations. It is nigh at hand, and the inhabitants of Zion must purge themselves from iniquity, folly, covetousness, vanity, and listen to and obey my laws, or they cannot have my protection. For I, the Lord, will not be mocked, but the wrongdoer shall receive the just recompense of reward, and the sinners in Zion shall be afraid, and fearfulness shall also take hold of the wicked and the ungodly that are in your midst. So, real quick there, the Lord once again is reminding us that when we do as he commands, we have the promised blessing, right? Now, here's where it gets tricky. That promised blessing isn't always what we think it is. So let me give you an example. Gosh, I just shared this in the last podcast I was on too. But I think it fits. When Amber and I first get married, we don't get married in the temple because I hadn't been a member for a full year. And the LDS Church, I think they still have this policy where you got to be a member a year before you take out your endowments. You go to the temple. There's another policy that used to be in place that has now been changed. But that policy was if you got a marriage, if you were married outside the temple, you had to wait a year before you could go back in and be sealed. So I was like looking at about a year and a half. So I go to my bishop and I'm like, look, I'm getting married now, but I haven't been a member a full year. So does this still apply? What's the protocol here? And he's like, that's a darn good question. Let me reach out and call. So he eventually gets shuffled over to a 70, and the 70 says, you know what? He's a new member. When he reaches a year, they can go in a year from membership, not a year from the marriage. When he reaches a year of membership, go ahead and let him go through. in that space of time, my wife Amber got pregnant, and we have to we do everything we're supposed to. I mean, we keep every single covenant and commandment that we could think of. We were saying our prayers nightly. We were taking the temple prep classes. We were paying our tithing. We were fulfilling our callings. In those days, church was 3 hours long. We were doing that. Like we were checking all the boxes, right? And we have a date set to go to the temple, and then Amber's grandfather dies up in Washington State. So we go from Boise up to Washington. And before we leave, I realize, oh, that's over when we're supposed to be at the temple, right? And they said, I was like, oh, that sucks, but I get it. So we reschedule it. We push it out a couple of weeks. And as we're getting ready to leave Washington, Amber's mom comes to us and says, hey, I'm not going to be able to make it down because there's too many family affairs I have to go through up here. Can you push it back one more week? Yeah, we can do that. So we push it back again. 2 days before we're supposed to go get our endowments and be sealed before the baby's born, Amber starts going into premature labor. And the doctor puts her flat on her back. And we asked the doctor as we're leaving, like, can we still go to the temple? And he was LDS. And he said, I wouldn't advise that. I'm going to advise against that because there's a lot of standing up and sitting down. And as you do that, that's going to throw you into early labor again. And we got to get this kid to this week mark, sort of a thing, right? We got to get to this week so we know everything's good. So I'm irritated, right? I'm like, I've done everything you asked. What's going on, right? Still God's most petulant child. Comes time for my son Tyler to be born, and he's born, and everything seems to be going great, right? Like the birth goes off without a hitch. We're all good. Amber is kind of, getting medical attention after the birth. She's like, why don't you just go check on Tyler? Because we notice they rolled him back to the nursery. And I go in there and there's nurses, like a ton of nurses, and one doctor standing over his bassinet. And the doctor turns around, looks at me, and he goes, your son has to go to Boise. We were in a little town called Caldwell, which is about 20, 25 miles outside of Boise. Said, your son needs to go to Boise because he's born with pneumonia, and we don't have the equipment to take care of this. So he's going for an ambulance ride. I'm like, oh, man. And I was like, okay, I should probably go talk to Amber. And I remember I turned around and, like, literally, I opened the door up from the nursery to go back to her room. And her nurse is standing right in front of me, and she goes, your wife just passed out.
Oh,
So I'm like, oh, man. So I rush in there. She's conscious again, and the doctor's been in and looked at her. He's like, she's just tired. She's just wore out. She's okay. And she looks at me, and the doctor must have already told her, and she's like, just follow Tyler. I'll be fine. I'll call my mom, and my mom will come back and sit with me. So I give my son Tyler a blessing, and it's not a great blessing, right? It's the first one I ever give without assistance. And I'm literally cookbooking this thing. I got the manual out and like, okay, I got this, right? I didn't have, because it's like 3:30 in the morning, right? And I'm
yeah.
like, my home teacher would have been fine if I'd have called him, but I didn't. But they load Tyler up after that, and they take him to St. Luke's, and my guts are twisted, right? Because it's panic now, right? It's panic for me. I'm like, am I going to lose my son without having this ordinance done? And as I'm walking out to the car, I remember thinking, yeah, God and I are going to have it out, right? Like, I don't know what the hell's going on, but I feel like I've done my due diligence here, and we need to have a chat. And so it was a very, very, I yelled a lot, right, on driving following that ambulance. It was a rainy night too. I remember that. It was raining sideways. It was late September. We get to the hospital and he gets settled in. Everything's in hand. And I'm like, I haven't slept now at this point in 36 hours. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go downstairs. I'm gonna grab a sody. I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna sit in that little courtyard and see if I can't get my bearings about me. Because Amber's still in Caldwell. She's supposed to be shipped out later that day. And I'm sitting out there and I see a guy walk up that I knew from church. And he'd come up to see me. His name was Don. And Don was old when I first joined the church. He had to be in his late 70s. And he came over and he just sat next to me. He goes, "Well, how's it going?" And I just remember I looked at him and I thought, that's a dumb question, but okay, right? And I'm like, "Well, Don, you asked, so you're gonna get it." Right? And I'm like, "I'm kind of irritated." And he's like, "Well, what's going on?" And I tell him the whole thing, what I just told you. He goes, "Oh, sounds like sounds like your vision's not right." And I'm like, "Old man, you are certainly close, right? Like, you keep this up, and
Almost got it.
I'm gonna have more repenting to do, right?" And I said, "Oh, do explain. Like, you're viewing the gospel the wrong way." And I'm like, "Really? How am I viewing the gospel?" And he's like, "You're viewing it like fire suppression, and it's not. It's more like fire insurance." And I'm like, "Okay, elaborate." And he's like, "You have this idea that just because you're doing what you're supposed to, everything's supposed to turn out just like you expect it to turn out. That's not what the gospel does. What the gospel does is give you some of the tools that you need to get through the experience you're going through now." Yeah, what I wanted to say is, "That's dumb, get out of here." But what I was forced to say, because it was true, was, he's right. Now, what was the blessing out of that situation? I'll tell you what the blessing was. The blessing was is that I was approaching this like a checklist, right? I was looking at it like, I checked that box and I checked that box and I checked that box. But what's the one thing that the Lord couldn't extract from me as I was checking boxes? It was my heart, right? I had surrendered a certain portion, but I hadn't surrendered enough in his judgment, which was correct. The Lord's always correct. He wanted more of my heart before I made those covenants. And I wrestled with that for a few days in that hospital. So I tell that long story for this reason. We have an idea what the blessing is, and sometimes the Lord even tells us what it is, but we don't get it. Well, that's not a failure of God's, that's a failure of ours. And sometimes the blessing we get isn't the blessing we want, but it is the blessing we need. And I think that's super important to keep in mind as we start talking about the Lord being on the hook to deliver us blessings because we do what he said. That blessing may not look like what you think it should look like.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's very good.
The other thing I want to ask here, going down into verse 7, and that is where it talks about purging from ourselves iniquity, folly, covetousness, vanity. How do we do that?
Well,
I think. Oh, go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Joe.
Mirza.
I think I think it's more simple than complicated, and I'm going to explain that in the way that the Savior tells the Nephites in the Book of Mormon when he comes back after he's been crucified to study the scriptures, for his word and his law is in them. And I was barely having this conversation with a non-LDS person, and we were talking about the laws of God and so forth. And we were saying if we followed every single law and word that comes from the mouth of God, that we would be completely different people than we are. And I think, I mean, look at John Taylor. Speaking of John Taylor, one of his comments were that someone asked him, how did he become so great? And he said it was all the little things. And so that goes back to even my original comment of back in our history is that are we obeying the first principles of the gospel? And I think as we progress in life and we start to do the little, what you'd call the little laws, the bigger laws are easier because it's precedence. It follows that down or up, so to speak. And so I think in purging ourselves of iniquity, it's like you said, Dave, I think it's turning our hearts truly to God and not checking the box and actually not becoming a scribe and a Pharisee by word, but actually by deed, being a follower of Christ.
Absolutely. Joseph, you were about to say something. Good
Yeah, I was
stuff,
just
by the
thinking.
way, Lorenzo.
Yeah, that was excellent. No, I think that it's interesting when you take these revelations because if you study these individuals who received them, you see a little bit of their character as these revelations come out because God will give these things to us and our mind has to interpret them. And so this stuff that he's saying here to John Taylor about, you know, purging ourselves of all of these what you would say weaknesses of the flesh, you see his own experience in this as well. And you see that he understands this, that it's a fundamental thing for us to have to subdue the flesh and to subdue these weaknesses that creep up so much. And it is more simple than just saying, "Oh well, you just you just have to do the right thing." You We have the guideline, and I think that for those of us who believe in the ordinances and have received them, I go back to that all the time because those those covenants that we make in the temple, they they tell us exactly how to purge these things. And we should be working on this before we make those covenants, but because it'll make it a lot easier to keep those covenants. I remember our grandpa Helmut, he used to say all the time, he used to follow that creed that John Taylor made, that Lorenzo said about it's all the little things. All the little things are what makes a man great. And I think that that's a lesson of life to follow all the time is that it's you just have to be diligent in all the little things.
I couple things on that. I used to spend a few summers, with my grandparents up in Port Orchard, Washington. And my grandparents had survived the Dust Bowl out in South Dakota. And I remember my grandmother kept immaculate floors. Like that woman, I swear, would sweep and mop 8 times a day, right? And I once asked her, I was like, "How do you keep it so clean all the time?" And she said, "Well, I take care of the corners and then the middle of the room takes care of itself." And I
Mm.
was like, "What do you mean by that?" And she's like, "Well, no one looks in the corners, but everybody looks in the center. And if the corners are clean, you'll instinctively clean the center because you see it."
Yep.
Now, let's use this with the gospel. I think sometimes, especially men fall into this, right? Because we're all dudes and we all have testosterone and that's just how we work, right? But we always want the grand sweeping gesture, right?
Yeah.
We want we want to be the ones to say, "I don't want on Zion's camp," but I'd have been one in the back saying, "We should go ahead and finish the job," right? Or, we want the grand gesture, right? Um no, I don't think there's a man alive who wouldn't say who's truly converted to say, I would give my life for this gospel in a heartbeat." And that's good. We should feel that way. But would you live for the gospel? Would you do the little things? Would you do the things that nobody sees? And I don't know a lot, but the one thing I'm willing to stake just about everything on. If we look at the spiritual giants, What separates them from us? And at first, I used to think, well, it's because they've spent a lifetime in the temple, right? And they've done the grand sweeping gesture. No,
Yeah.
no, it's not, right? What it is that that guy will read some sort of gospel material while I'm reading something else that's not that important. Or he's the guy that's listening to a symposium put on by scholars of the gospel, and I'm still cranking out to Van Halen, right? It's it's those little things that I think separate greatness from just good enough,
Mediocrity. Yep.
right? And so I do think it's those little things, as Lorenzo pointed out, that kind of separate that. And look, you talk about let's just look at some of the things he talks about in there that the Lord lists, right? Vanity, covetousness, inequity. I mean, look, certainly those things can be seen, but usually those are sins of a much more private nature,
Yep.
right? So I
Yep.
think in his own way, the Lord is saying, clean up your corners, right? Get that out. He's asking for more again, right? Okay, you've come this far, but I want more. I need all of your heart. And I think this is a plea to get us to do that, to surrender our heart. And I think this ties it right in with the will that we possess, right? There's only one thing God's never going to encroach on against us, and that's our will. That has to be given freely. The Savior illustrated that pattern in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? Where he says, "Not my will, your will be done." This is hard, but nonetheless, not my will, your will be done. And that's something that has to be surrendered. That is not something he will ever take by force.
I
Yep.
think too, a story I've liked to tell lately that they did I think it was Angel Studios, but they did a movie about King David, and
Mhm.
throughout his life, you can see that he's always telling the people, "Don't look at me, look at God." Especially after he kills Goliath and stuff. It's like it's not about me, it's about what God's done. And the thing I just love so much about David's story is he did the work before God called him. Like you could see his heart was already there. And you could see that, like, for instance, after that whole movie's over at the very, very end, he gets crowned King of Judah, and everybody's looking at him, and he takes a part of his robe and he tears it off, which is essentially supposed to be disgraceful, so to speak, in their time and period. And he puts it up in the wind, and he looks up to the sky and he says, "We're back in your hands."
Yeah,
And it just shows. I mean, here he's being crowned king, but you could see where his heart was, and it goes back to what we're talking about where your heart is. And so I think in your private moments, in your everyday life, to work on those little things, just as something as simple as telling the truth or not exaggerating, is a huge part of just in the simplest thing of being able to trust someone. And so
right.
I think those little things can really make a big difference about where our heart is when the big things come.
Absolutely. Joseph, I think you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about, and for me, obviously in my life right now, I'm going through a lot of new things. You find out in a big hurry when you start living plural marriage about all of the little dusty corners. They creep up and they bite you in the butt. But yeah, that's the thing that keeps coming up to my mind. I'm just like, I did not realize how dirty the corners can be, or how dirty they can get. And it's really a blessing to do some introspection in our own lives and see where those, and at least try to figure out where those dusty corners are. And I think that it always comes back to, we've neglected to work on something. We've pushed it on, put it on the shelf. We've pushed it till tomorrow, and yet God still calls us to move forward. He gives us callings in our priesthood labor. He gives us work in our families' lives. He gives us all of our children. that bring all those corners up again. And he's really merciful at just the opportunity to see those things before he calls us to go through something really, really important. And sometimes he just calls us to go through it anyway because we're so dim-witted that we won't actually take the time to look at it before.
Yeah.
And it's just, and I see that with what John Taylor's receiving from the Lord here through all of this. It's just like, come on, guys, I've given you every opportunity, and yet I actually have to remind you through a revelation such as this to do the simple things. And it's sad that that has to happen, but we do for some odd reason. We always have to keep being reminded to do the same things over and over again.
100%. No, it absolutely is true. All right. Anything else you guys want to bring up on these sets that we've read so far before we move on to the last paragraph here, the last 4 verses? Okay, let's do it. I think it's your turn, Lorenzo.
Yep. So this is verse 11. And if you, my people, obey my law and keep my commandments to do them, not in name only, but in reality, I will be your shield and your protector, your strong tower, and no man shall be able to hurt you, for I will be your defense. Therefore, humble yourselves before me, and purify yourselves, that your acts and doings may be acceptable before me. For if you do not, you will share in the condemnation of the wicked. Therefore, listen to the counsels of those whom I have appointed, and seek not your own will and way, but the will of the Lord your God. For by him only can you be sustained in the time of trouble, which is fast approaching. Even so, amen.
Amen. All right. So real quick here. I wanna break this down real fast. Not real fast, but I want to get to this part right away. It was the part here where it says, um, therefore humble yourselves and purify yourselves, that your acts and doings may be acceptable before me. There are guys that we will meet, and look, I think every church has them to one degree or another. Those guys who are like, yeah, I've got it together, fellas. I've got nothing going on in my life. I've got this all figured out. Um, those guys I tend to worry about a little bit, right? And maybe I'm just projecting out. Maybe they do have it that together, and it's just me that I'm skeptical of. But I know in my own life, the more I the closer I get to the Savior, the more his light illuminates my flaws. That is a good thing. That is a darn good thing, because it's only that when they've been illuminated, it would be like if there was no light that touched the corner, right? How do you know it's dirty, right? You need something to shine it on there. And so I get nervous when I start hearing people go, kind of put forth that sentiment of, I got it all figured out. I got this. I got it handled, right? Um, there, there was a there's a guy I knew back in back in Maryland. Good dude. He was a Jew, and his dad was a rabbi. And we were sitting around one day and we were talking, and he had this dry, sarcastic sense of humor, right? And I just looked at him and I said, "Wait, your dad's a rabbi?" And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, are you a practicing Jew?" He's like, "Nope, I perfected it." Right? And in that moment, I was like, I understood that he was being facetious and sarcastic, but it does show that, like, if you ever think you've got it perfected, if you're still on earth, you don't got it perfected, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not a thing. When you're perfected, I think you're pretty much done here. If you get to that point. And so I think this is one of those things, again, I think the Lord is saying, get rid of all this stuff. And I do find it interesting that he's telling John Taylor, and we have to think of the time frame he's in, right? This is 1884. So the feds are starting to come down from on high. Um, they're given a promise, right? That the Lord's going to be their defense. Now, likewise, we have promises. We know who wins in the end, right?
Yeah.
So what prevents us as people from being on the winning side? Because that, to me, if I read the scriptures, I know who wins in the end, right? It's our Father in heaven. So if we know that, why wouldn't we just choose to be on his side? That's what we're being asked to do. We know the outcome. There's no cliffhanger here. We get it. What what prevents us from being able to do these things, from purging those things out of our lives, from humbling ourselves and purifying ourselves? What is in the way?
I'd say, go ahead, Renzo.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So I think that at least my opinion on this is that it comes really down to selfishness. I feel like that we care too much for our desires and we don't want to fully give our heart over. I mean, I think that's key to what he's saying here, that we keep his commandments not in name only, but in reality. I think that phrase right there, what he says here, not in name only, but in reality, is the key. And I think that we forget a lot of times that we do a lot of things by ceremony rather than by reality, and actually doing it with real intent rather than just to do it so that we say we did it.
Yep.
And I mean, I catch myself doing that a lot of times. Like we'll go through, we'll have church, and I'm like, "Hey, we got the sacrament. We've got to do the wine. I got to get it ready. We got to get the bread ready. We got to get it all done. We get it done. We clean it up. We put it away. I'm like, whew, okay, we did it. Now we have that done for another month, so we're good to go.
Just checking
That
boxes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that is not what God wants. He does not want us to do it that way. He wants our hearts. He wants us to do it with heartfelt desire and commitment, I believe. And I think that that's really what keeps us back in everything else. We go to church to get it over with. We read the scriptures to get it over with. And we're not really doing it with real intent. I think that's what keeps us held back a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Lorenzo, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to put a little different angle on it in the sense that if you take what the prophet Joseph said, that as soon as you get knowledge, you can have power. I think the devil is so divisive and so able to easily deceive us, thinking we're either better than we are or we've got this handled, kind of like what you said. And I think if we don't fully understand the scriptures and know the word of God, I think we can be very easily deceived. And it's a part of the Revelations, the last days, that the very elect will barely escape, and the Lord will have to cut it short in order for them to be saved, so to speak. I'm paraphrasing, probably didn't get 100% right, but the point is we we get really comfortable that we're checking the boxes and that we're doing what we should be doing, rather than, because even kind of like a thing like this, are we breaking down the scriptures? Are we understanding them verse by verse? Are we understanding the principles of what's actually trying to be taught? And are we able to detect where the devil is coming in and dissuading us? And I think in order to purify ourselves, we have to be able to align ourselves with God and the ultimate celestial condition that He's in by living by these things in reality, like He says. So I think knowing God and knowing His Word is a big part of it to not be deceived.
Absolutely. No, I agree with both things you guys said. Um, let me ask this question here. And this one is something that I think we need to address, as all three of us here aren't exactly one manners, right? In our theology. And it starts in verse 14, where he says, "Therefore, listen to the counsels of those whom I have appointed, and seek not your own will and way, but the will of the Lord your God." So if we're not one manners, do we just say 14 doesn't apply to us? I mean, what are we
Oh no.
looking at there?
I mean,
I
to
don't
me,
think so either.
I think that this is fantastic counsel. I think that God has appointed men to fulfill a certain role in our lives. And I think that men who are called of God are generally trying to do his will. I think we should absolutely listen to what they have to say. And I think that we need to see what we can take out of what they have counseled us and see what applies to us and see what is God's will. Because he's saying to listen to the counsel and then seek not your own will in that. Like, I think we have a tendency as humans to gratify ourselves with our own interpretation of what somebody's saying, and even our own interpretation of what God's trying to say. And then we sit there, we all agree, and we all say, you know, all's well in Zion, and that is not what he's trying to say here at all, in my opinion.
100%. Lorenzo, you had something you wanted to say there on that.
Yeah, I mean, even to add to what Joseph's saying, he's saying listen to the counsels of those whom I have appointed, and he's not saying listen to the commandments of those whom I have appointed, because only God commands. But I think it goes back to a conversation I was having with one of my brethren, in the sense that we talked about how do we understand who the Lord's anointed is, like, because the scriptures will point to don't. I don't think it's desecrate or disgrace, but to not say any bad thing against the Lord's anointed. So who's the Lord's anointed? I mean, and the conversation is that anybody that has been called of God in the priesthood would be the Lord's anointed. And so any one of us who has been called of God to a position has the opportunity to receive revelation and counsel with the Lord. Now, there's proper order that when you have an established church, it would be the head of that church that would receive revelation for the church of that group or council or ward or stake or whatever. But I think if we listen to the counsels of the anointed of God and follow the will of the Lord and not our own way, that is a way to get back to him.
Yeah. So I wanted to hit that because so often people will say, "Oh, well, you don't believe in a one man. That must mean you don't believe in an order either." Well, no, that's not it. I'm not for anarchy, right? I like structure. I like knowing who to go to for certain things, right? I think that's important. I think the dichotomy is made that you don't just sign a blank check over to that guy, right? You don't just assume that what he says is infallible. Even Brigham taught that, right? Even Brigham said, "I hope the saints are going back and praying about what it is I'm teaching them." And later in his life, I believe that this is a little bit of prophecy and foreshadowing. He basically says, "My worst fear for the Latter-day Saints right now is that they have too much confidence in their leaders and that they'll lead them to hell." I think that that is a profound statement coming from Brigham Young. Brigham's not necessarily known for being super diplomatic. So for Brigham to say that, um, he's trying to get across something here.
He was feeling it.
And
He was
so
feeling it.
what's that? Go ahead, Joseph.
I just said he was feeling it. Like, he was feeling the
Yep.
fact that they can have a massive impact on their people, and they have to be careful, and people have to follow God, not them.
Yep. 100%. And look, you can have structure and order without having tyranny. It is possible. And I know that sometimes in a knee-jerk reaction, right? And I understand it. I get where it comes from. I'm not unsympathetic. Um, when you get traumatized, it's tough, right? And certainly I understand that, but that doesn't mean that we should allow anarchy or lack of structure to exist, because just like you can have tyranny with too much structure, you can also have tyranny without structure. Um, you'll just trade one tyrant in for 7,000 tyrants, right? Um, I think that's something that we have to understand. And I want to say this as well, right? I'm sure it's this way in with you guys too. There is a moment where you sustain somebody, right? Where you're asked to lift the right hand and sustain somebody in their calling. That doesn't mean that you're just going to go along with whatever they say. But what that does mean is that you're going to do your part to help them succeed in their calling in a
Yep.
righteous way. And that
Exactly.
means sometimes that means, you know, when you get your own personal revelation that what this leader has said is 100% correct, you go forward with that. Sometimes sustaining a leader might be like, "Look, I got some concerns here with what you said up there," right? And any leader who goes, "Well," who says, "Don't worry about it, I'm your leader and just do it," that's a red flag. Most
Yeah.
good leaders that I know will say, "Well, let's have a conversation. Let's sit down and talk about it," whether that's at work or at church. It's the same
Yep.
universal principle all the way through.
Yep.
Yep. And I think to tie into that, even what he's talking about, where he says to listen to the counsel of his anointed, just right before that, we just barely went over it. This is in conjunction with being humble and pure. So if we're humble and we're pure and we're getting counsel from the Lord's anointed, those all go hand in hand.
Yep. Yep. One last thing I wanted to hit on, and then I'll turn it over to you guys to kind of finish up with any last statements you got here. It talked a lot about putting your trust in the Lord there, right? If you just do what I say, I will be your shield and your tower of protection. My oldest daughter, Soraya, we used to have this game we used to play. Used to scare my wife to death, which is why we did it. Um, I would hold her by her feet, her ankles up here, clear up by my chest, and then she would just dive off. I would swing her between my legs, and then I'd flip her up, and she would just kind of like lay out, right? Because she had to, because I would grab her hands, and then I'd just keep flipping her like that. But I got thinking about one day, she's got like implicit trust in me that I'm going to catch her, right? To the point that she just kind of lays out to be caught because she has that kind of trust. And I thought, do I have that kind of trust in my Father, in my Heavenly Father? That, yeah, he's going to toss me up in the air, but does he got me? Right? Um, I got news for everybody. Discipleship, yeah, it's not it's not a spectator sport. And you're going to
No.
get flung in the air, right? And that's good. That's good
Yeah.
because you're going to find a lot out while you're up there, right?
Yeah.
But you got to trust he's got you. Um, I look at George Washington as this kind of an example. The guy is 6'2". Now, most men of the day are floating somewhere between 5'6" and 5'9". He's standing
Mhm.
at 6'2", broad-shouldered, athletic, and when he goes to war riding a white horse. Like that dude sticks out.
Yep.
And you think to yourself, why would he do that? That seems silly, right? Well, you read his writings, and what you figure out is he had implicit trust in God's plan. And he just said, well, if it's my time, it's my time. Now, we shouldn't use that to be foolish, right? We shouldn't use that. If we go skydiving, check the pack, right? Make sure that thing's ready to go. Um, don't be foolish. But at the same time, the Lord's going to ask us to do some uncomfortable things. And that's good. That's good. That's where growth happens. And quite frankly, it's kind of where the fun is anyway. What a boring story it's going to be if we get to the other side and they're like, well, what'd you do? Yeah, I just hung out, right? I just stayed
Yeah.
out of the
Chilling
way. I
with
didn't
me.
skin my knee ever. I didn't fall down. So it is all right. No, no. I had a good friend who was a Baptist, I think, when I was again living in Maryland. And it was kind of an eclectic group. We had a Jewish guy, we had a couple Catholic guys. I was the token Mormon, and then a couple Baptist guys. But we were all very active in our church, so we would sit around and have kind of gospel conversation, right? And the one guy, he had moved to Maryland from Texas, so he definitely was a Texan. Um, and we were talking about what how we would enter the other side. And he said, I want to roll in like I just crashed a motorbike. And I get up and I dust myself off and look at everybody else and go, do you guys see that? Um, I was kind of thinking about that. Like, I think we all should want to get there kind of that way, right? Like we were doing stuff. We weren't just passive, right? We were absolutely doing stuff. But you guys have any thoughts on that?
Not on the revelation, but I do have a closing remark when we come to that point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you guys have nothing else, I think we're pretty well done with that revelation.
Yeah, I think we did good.
Yep. So, Lorenzo, why don't you start
So
with your
we
final
talked,
comments here?
yeah, we've talked a lot about following God and not letting men uh, rule over you or having too much confidence or trust in men. We've talked a lot about our family lineage and stuff, and I just kept having the feeling that I want to leave the message that we love each one of you, and that we don't. It's like Brigham Young said, we're not seeking to cast you to hell. We want to bring you up with us in brotherly love, and we want you to be with us in the celestial kingdom. We want everyone to get to the same place. We're not looking to condemn. We're not looking to say you're right or you're wrong. I'm right. You should come follow me. That's not the point of what we're talking about. We're talking about what we should do as individuals to be smart, to be intelligent, to be capacitated, to be able to follow Christ as individuals and not as following another man. And Brigham Young also said that we assume we'll be able to get to heaven by holding on to another man's tailcoat. And that we'll get to heaven and we'll say, Brother so and so, come let me in the gate. But that's not how it works. We have to be able to, and I know a lot of people know this, but I don't want anybody to ever be so hard-hearted or offended by anything that was said that they're like, oh, they're self-righteous or whatever it might be. We want you to participate with us in building up God's kingdom, and we want to build the New Jerusalem with you and ushering in the millennium. And that's what I would hope for.
Amen. Joseph?
No, I want to echo what Lorenzo said. I feel the same way, and I I feel like that the more time that goes by, the more time I have the opportunity to live this religion, the softer my heart becomes, and the more that I realize how important each and every one of God's children are, and the more I want them, all of everyone, to be able to experience the joy that life is. Because the fact of the matter is life's going to be hard no matter what you choose. You can choose to live a religious, a zealously religious life, or you could choose to just go be a bum on the street, or you could go out and see what the world has to offer. It's all going to be hard. Every choice you make is going to be hard. To me, the only true and comforting note that I have, and the only belief I have, is that God has a plan for me. And I know He has a plan for everyone. And be courageous to go and choose that plan and find out what it is and do it. Don't have fear in your heart that somebody is going to take away from you any of that opportunity, because you hold the key to your success and your failure. We all do.
Amen. Well, gentlemen, we've been at this now right at 3 hours. So it goes fast, doesn't it?
So fast.
Everybody said, "How can you do 3-hour podcasts?" And I'm kind of like, "Well, I don't know how I don't." Good luck unpacking anything in Mormonism in 45 minutes. But
funny.
guys,
No, I was just
you
gonna
hit.
say it's funny with the time thing because I told my wife, she's like, "How long are you gonna be?" And I'm like, "Oh, we won't be any more than an hour and a half. We'll never be one of those 3-hour podcasts."
You would be surprised. Yeah, no, it doesn't take long. Guys, you did a fantastic job. Thanks so much for being here. And look, I tell everybody this, and I mean it. Once you've been on once, you got a standing invitation to come back. You guys have something you're studying that you want to talk about, you hit me up, and we'll get you back on without a problem. All right.
Sounds good.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having us. This was
Yeah.
a treat.
No, it was a treat for me. Again, you guys did a great job. I'm lucky to count you as friends. So, other than that, everybody else, we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.